Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot into the smoky stillness of a Viking longhouse, where the hearth is low, the air is thick with yesterday's stew and peat smoke, and someone's already rolled into your side of the sleeping bench. You're not a warrior or a chief. Not tonight, anyway. You're just one of many inhabitants in this crowded timber lodge at the edge of a fjord, where mornings begin slowly, stubbornly, and always with a little bit of frostbite. Before long, your nose twitches. There's that familiar mingling of damp wool, singed hair, and whatever was left too close to the fire last night. The thatch above you sighs under a dusting of snow, and the fire in the center is nothing more than a few glowing coals buried in ash. You lie on a straw-stuffed mattress, shared with a sibling who kicks in their sleep, and a sheep who doesn't. The blanket over you is a heavy woolen thing that smells like both warmth and wet dog, and you're honestly not sure which end is up. Outside, the first light of dawn filters through the smoke hole, casting a soft gray glow across the interior beams. Wide, axe-hewn planks blackened by years of hearth smoke. There's no rooster here. The only wake-up call is a muffled cough, a creaking yawn, and someone stepping heavily on a squeaky floorboard by the door. You shift slightly, immediately regretting it. Your arm is asleep, your foot is on someone else's foot. And whatever your pillow is made of, it's certainly not feathers. You suspect straw, goat hair, and some kind of ancient Viking neck regret. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far this sleepy ship sails. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You peel back your blanket, carefully. You don't want to wake the cranky uncle at your feet or disturb the surprisingly peaceful goat pressed against your ribs. Every movement has the quiet tension of a shared space. Slow, deliberate, and tinged with resignation. Historians still argue whether longhouses had individual family cubicles or more of a free-for-all bench arrangement. But here in your longhouse, privacy is mostly a theory, and elbow room is a luxury. There are raised platforms running along each side of the house, wooden sleeping benches lined with furs and woven mats. You've claimed one by the central fire for warmth, and because you were too slow to get the corner by the door, your breath puffs in little clouds as you sit up, shoulders hunched against the chill. The embers flicker, and the smell of charred peat lingers. You can hear the wind pushing against the outer walls, whispering through gaps in the thatch above. Somewhere to your left, someone lets out a snort that vibrates the rafters. You wish it was the goat, but no, that's definitely Cousin Eric. You blink blearily around the room. There are roughly 24 bodies scattered along the sides, some sprawled, others curled into tight little knots of fur and elbows. A few are already stirring. One figure wrapped in a deerskin cloak, hunched over the fire, poking at the embers with a carved stick. Another murmuring in what sounds like prayer, though it might just be complaints about a sore back. You swing your legs down slowly. The floor is packed earth, uneven and cold. You gingerly lower your feet, flat, careful, and immediately recoil. It's freezing, absolutely, unreasonably freezing. You pull one foot back under your cloak and contemplate your life choices. Why didn't you sleep with your boots on? Why didn't you perhaps sleep somewhere warm in, say, the 19th century? But here you are, and there's no going back. A draft curls around your ankles as the front door, really just a large wooden slab wedged into the frame, creaks open. Someone has braved the outside world already, and a gust of winter air rushes in like an uninvited troll. You shiver involuntarily, reaching for your cloak, which is only mildly damp from being too close to the stew pot overnight. You drape it over your shoulders and begin the long, awkward dance of stepping around and over the scattered limbs of your fellow Longhousers. A toe catches your knee. Someone mutters. A chicken. Yes, there is absolutely a chicken inside. Flaps indignantly from a dark corner and rustles back into the straw. You give it a half-hearted glare. This is not a quiet morning in a modern home. This is a slow, communal crawl into consciousness, where every sound is amplified by low ceilings, and every movement feels like it could wake a berserker. You pass by the family loom in the corner, draped in half-finished wool, and the wooden chest someone uses as a seat/storage/bed for the dog. You note with sleepy irritation that the family's good fur cloak is gone. Someone must have swiped it for the night. You, on the other hand, have what could generously be described as a damp poncho, possibly made of moss. You reach the hearth again. The coals need stoking. Fire duty rotates, and today it's yours. Lucky you. You kneel carefully, easing down beside the smoldering ashes. Your knees crack like a sagging longship hull. Grabbing the iron poker, you stir the embers gently, coaxing a flicker, a glow. The trick is to bury dry moss or kindling in just the right spot. Some Viking households kept slow-burning fire all night, banking it with ash. Others let it die and started fresh every morning with flint and steel. Your family is the kind that believes the fire is a spirit. Never let it go out, or it'll wander off and sulk. So you work carefully, feeding it bits of bark and that special dried fish skin that always smells like regret. And just as the first flame licks upward, someone sneezes behind you, loudly, then blames the cat. You don't question it. You just lean in, hands extended toward the glow, eyelids drooping with the warmth. This, oddly enough, is the most peaceful part of the morning. You stay there for a while, crouched low beside the fire like a human pretzel, trying to soak in enough warmth to forget the creeping chill in your toes. The embers respond with a few encouraging pops. Someone throws a damp log your way. Whether out of kindness or laziness, it's hard to say, and you drag it closer, nudging it onto the fire with the grace of a sleep-deprived seal. Behind you, the Longhouse is slowly waking. There's a rhythm to the rising. Yawns echo down the wooden walls. Someone coughs up last night's dreams, and a child mumbles something about bread. You hear the creak of the sleeping platforms as bodies shift, stretch, and groan their way toward vertical. It's less a coordinated wake-up, and more a chain reaction of reluctant motion. You shuffle aside to make space as a few others join you at the hearth. Your older sister, still swaddled in a fur that used to be a bear, and a neighbor who always smells faintly of onions, no matter the season. You all sit without speaking, just blinking into the flames like villagers summoned by prophecy, but too sleepy to ask questions. In the hazy half-light of dawn, shapes move like ghosts. There's someone picking straw from their tunic, another wrestling with a stubborn cloak that's stuck on their head like a cursed helmet. The goat, yes, that goat, is now awake too, stretching its neck and emitting a bleat that sounds a little too smug for a creature that definitely peed on your boots last week. Welcome to your shared morning. Sleeping arrangements in Viking longhouses weren't just crowded, they were democratic in the worst way. Most households, historians agree, didn't prioritize comfort so much as warmth and efficiency. The Longhouse was the social nucleus, a multi-purpose room for eating, sleeping, storytelling, smithing, and occasionally hiding from awkward conversations. And yes, you're all basically sleeping in a group pile with varying degrees of mutual consent. By now, your eyes have adjusted to the dimness. You spot your uncle, Bjorn, curled up with his back to the hearth, snoring like an avalanche in slow motion. His beard alone takes up more space than two small children. A few younger cousins lie entangled like puppies on the far bench, one drooling onto a fur blanket that definitely isn't his. You'd intervene? But honestly, you respect the confidence. The roof timbers creak above, sagging just slightly with age, and the weight of thatch dampened by last night's snow. A draft finds its way through a gap in the wall and ruffles your hair like a judgmental ghost. You wrap your cloak tighter and nudge the fire again. "Don't let it die," someone mutters behind you. Probably your mother. It's hard to tell when she's not holding a ladle threateningly. She appears moments later, arms full of peat blocks and dried rushes, her hair in a braid that somehow defies gravity. She gives the fire a once-over and nods, which is Viking for adequate. Then, just when you think you might drift off sitting up, the worst part happens. The coffers. One by one, they start hacking into the cold air, rattling lungs like ancient bellows. It's not contagious, just the side effect of sleeping in a smoke-filled wooden box with 20 other people and no chimney. The smoke hole above is doing its best, but let's be honest, Viking architecture did not prioritize ventilation. Historians still debate whether longhouses always included proper smoke escapes, or if some were just, well, perpetual indoor barbecue pits. You're inclined to believe the latter as you blink through the haze and try not to inhale a chunk of ash. Eventually, someone fumbles for the wooden ladder leaning against the far wall and climbs up to the loft above the door. That's where the youngest and smallest usually sleep, closer to the rising heat, but also right in the smoke's path. You once tried it. You lasted 3 minutes and came down smelling like a singed pine cone. But hey, some people like it. Your cousin Sigrid says it clears her sinuses. Of course, she also says she can talk to squirrels. You begin the ceremonial stretching phase. You bend forward, side to side, and backward until your spine makes a sound, like someone stepping on a frosty turnip. Next to you, your sister lets out a noise that could be either a yawn or a war cry. It's hard to say before breakfast. More people gather near the fire. A bowl of water is passed around, everyone taking quick splashes to the face. It's bracing. Very bracing. In fact, your skin tries to retreat into your bones. The water is drawn from a barrel just outside the door. Collected rain and snowmelt. And it's slightly brown, but no one dares complain. Complaining means chores. You rub your hands together, flexing your fingers. The joints are stiff but responsive. Winter's always hardest on the knuckles. Somewhere in the back corner, someone is already sneezing. Probably your cousin with the hay allergy. Why a child with hay fever lives in a straw-roofed house full of livestock is a mystery best left to the gods. And then there's the seating reshuffle. Everyone starts nudging for the warmest spots. The side closest to the fire without being so close that you roast your knees. It's a delicate balance. One wrong move, and you're either frozen or smoking. You win a decent position by sheer luck, and the fact that your aunt got distracted yelling at a goose. Yes, there is now also a goose inside. No one knows when it arrived. No one dares question it. Goose law reigns supreme. As the fire builds strength, the longhouse brightens. Golden light begins to push away the shadows, illuminating baskets, tools, and piles of drying herbs hung from the rafters. A wooden spoon clatters to the floor. A sleepy groan answers it. This isn't just a morning, it's a mood. And the mood is, why did we ever leave the blanket? Your stomach grumbles. Loudly. Loud enough that even the goose turns its head in faint judgment. Now that most of the longhouse's human and semi-human occupants are upright and vaguely alert, the daily business of breakfast begins. Not with sizzling pans or toaster dings, but with the slow clatter of wooden bowls and the deeply unambitious search for leftovers. Food, like warmth and floor space, is a community affair. You shuffle toward the storage end of the longhouse, where bins, barrels, and sacks squat beneath hanging sides of salted meat and tightly sealed clay jars. The scent here is a cocktail of old grain, dried fish, aging onions, and just a whisper of pickled regret. You open a lidded pot and recoil slightly. Yep, that one was supposed to be beer, but went rogue. Definitely beer adjacent now. Historians still argue whether Viking breakfasts were one communal pot or a mix of personal stash raiding. But what's certain is that it was usually simple. Porridge, dried bread, perhaps some skyr if someone hadn't eaten it all at midnight. Your morning feast today? A scoop of barley porridge from a wooden tub, and what may or may not be a sliver of smoked herring. You sniff it. It sniffs back. You take your chances anyway. The porridge is cold, sticky, and manages to taste both bland and suspicious at the same time. You chew slowly, staring into the fire like someone remembering a better meal in a different life, perhaps as a Roman senator or a house cat. Still, it fills the hole, and the warmth from the hearth softens the experience. Around you, others munch and slurp, some with enthusiasm, others with the dead-eyed resignation of people who've had the same breakfast since the last equinox. Your aunt breaks her bread into the porridge with the solemnity of a sacred rite. Your cousin eats his like he's in a speed contest against himself. The goat tries to get a bite and is firmly pushed away, only to immediately attempt again from a different angle. Over by the entry, the day's first real task is underway: collecting water. The wooden pail brigade assembles, groggy and half-dressed, bundling up in thick cloaks and woolen hoods. Fetching water means stepping outside, which, in Viking terms, is a full-on expedition. There's snow on the ground, ice on the path, and a very real chance of running into your weird neighbor who always asks if you've heard the omens today. You're spared water duty today. Thank Thor. But that means it's your turn to sweep the Longhouse floor. Not with a vacuum, not even with a broom as we know it, but with a bundled branch broom, stiff and stubborn. You start near the hearth, gently brushing the night's accumulation of ash, straw, and dropped breakfast towards the far corner. It's slow, it's thankless, and it kicks up a fine cloud of dust that immediately sticks to your forehead, like you've been kissed by a dirt fairy. You pass by the family's tools, an axe, a couple of carving knives, and what might be a bone comb resting near the loom. Everything here has a purpose. Multi-purpose, really. Your sleeping bench is also your dining seat, your comb is a lice-deterring weapon, and your breakfast spoon doubles as a goat deterrent. A low discussion starts near the fire. Today's weather, fishing plans, who's going to patch the roof before the next snow? You catch snippets. Raffen said the sea ice is thinner. That seal oil barrel needs moving. Whose turn is it to talk to old Toke? Even within these timber walls, Viking mornings are all about survival, in layers. First the fire, then the food, then the chores, and finally the plans. The order never changes, though the enthusiasm often does. You glance up at the ceiling beams, noting the bundles of dried herbs and fish bladders hanging above. Yes, those are real things. And yes, they're leaking slightly. One swings when someone walks past too briskly. You try not to think about what might drip on your next bowl of porridge. Just don't sit directly under them. In a cozy corner, your grandmother is already spinning flax with a drop spindle, humming a tuneless melody that somehow makes your brain feel 5 degrees warmer. The rhythmic twist of her fingers, the slow spin of the spindle. It's hypnotic. Comforting, too. Like the whole world is gently tethered by her quiet insistence that thread must be made. It's moments like these that historians point to when they say the Longhouse was more than shelter. It was memory, story, skill, every daily motion tied to generations before and after. Still, not everything is poetic. As you move toward the entry for fresh air, you're hit by the scent wall near the privy bucket. It's not even the worst one you've experienced, but it reminds you that hygiene in a Viking longhouse is aspirational. There's a reason sweet-smelling herbs are everywhere, tucked into rafters, stuffed into pillows, even scattered along the floor. You find a sprig of angelica in your sleeve and briefly thank your past self. And then you're out, standing in the doorway, peering into a world of white and silence. The snow has stopped, and frost clings to every branch and rooftop. You suck in a breath of crisp air and instantly regret it as your nose begins to run. The sea is visible in the distance, a glint of frozen blue beneath a sky already turning silver. Somewhere nearby, a raven caws. "Bad luck," says someone behind you, and shuts the door with a gust of wind. You exhale, return to the fire, and accept your fate. One more morning in the warm, smoky chaos of a Viking longhouse. And you didn't even burn the porridge today. So really, you're already winning. You sit back down near the hearth, easing into the same groove on the bench you warmed earlier. It's not exactly comfortable. There's a knot in the wood that pokes your left thigh like it holds a grudge. But it's familiar. And in the longhouse, familiar equals good. It means no surprises, no frostbite, and fewer opportunities to get roped into shoveling goat droppings. From across the room, a small commotion brews as someone attempts to start the day's first real debate. Who has to muck out the animal corner? Yes, the animal corner. Depending on your household's size and wealth, you might share your longhouse with pigs, goats, sheep, and occasionally a cow. These aren't pets. These are your walking pantry and heating system. Their body warmth is surprisingly effective, though it comes with a scent profile you might politely call earthy, with notes of hay and strong opinions. This morning, the pig is already awake and rooting around under the straw, snorting like it knows secrets. You avoid eye contact. That one bit your boot once, and you're still not convinced it didn't mean it. The goat has taken up residence near the wall again, chewing something that looks suspiciously like part of your cousin's tunic. No one seems overly concerned. You begin to suspect that ownership is a flexible concept in Viking households. If the goat can take it, it probably will. You finally get assigned your task for the hour, sweeping straw from the animal corner and laying down fresh bedding. You groan inwardly, but know better than to argue. Your grandmother once won an argument by pelting someone with hard cheese. You are not ready to go to war with dairy. With a grunt, you grab the pitchfork and approach the animal side of the house, separated by a low wooden divider that does almost nothing except mildly inconvenience the livestock. As you begin your careful removal of the soiled straw, the pig grunts in passive-aggressive disapproval, and the sheep refuse to move without being coaxed with song or snacks. You hum a tuneless melody as you work, mostly out of habit, and a vague belief that it might improve your odds of not being stepped on. The sheep, to their credit, look vaguely interested. One bleats softly, and you imagine it's a compliment. You're tired. Let yourself have this. As the chore goes on, you begin to understand why so many Viking names include references to animals. Bjorn, meaning bear. Ulf, meaning wolf. Sigrid, meaning victory, plus beautiful. Okay, that last one's a stretch, but the point is, animals aren't just guests here. They're part of the family. A smelly, loud, occasionally rude part, but family nonetheless. Historians still debate just how common it was for every longhouse to include animals inside year-round. Some argue that only poorer households did this. Others believe it was simply practical across the board, especially in harsh winters. Either way, you're living the dream, or the documentary reenactment. You finish mucking out the straw and toss it into a heap just outside the door. The cold air slaps your face, and you slap it right back with a shovel full of pig-soiled straw. Symbolically, anyway. You return inside to grab the fresh bedding. Dry straw from a stacked bundle that still smells faintly of last summer. It rustles pleasantly as you scatter it, and the sheep finally move to make way, clearly judging your technique. One of them tries to eat your sleeve. It's not your best moment. Eventually, the animal corner looks, well, not clean, but livable. You nod with grim satisfaction, wipe your hands on your tunic, and retreat toward the fire. Back at the hearth, you're just in time for another round of communal tasks. This time, mending. The baskets come out, full of socks with holes, tunics with suspicious tears, and mittens that look like they went through battle. You pick up a shirt that clearly tried to wrestle with an axe and lost. A needle, some wool thread, and you're in business. Now, you may not be the household's best mender, but you've developed a particular style. Functional, with character. Your stitches wander slightly, and once you accidentally sewed your sleeve to the tunic you were fixing. But today, the wool behaves. Mostly. And you only poke yourself twice, which is basically a victory lap. As you stitch in relative peace, conversation drifts lazily around the room. Someone talks about a dream they had where Odin appeared in a barrel. Someone else swears they saw a troll track near the river, which launches a good 5-minute discussion about how many toes trolls actually have. The general consensus is too many. Your grandmother chimes in, saying she remembers her grandmother's stories of sea serpents that curled around boats just to listen to the sailors' songs. You're not sure if it's a metaphor, a memory, or just something she invented to make the little ones behave. But you like it. You picture it. A giant, barnacle-covered serpent humming along to rowing chants. Not exactly terrifying, more comforting. Like a massive, scaly dog with an ear for rhythm, you finish your mending and hold up the tunic. The patch is crooked, the thread is a different shade of gray, and one end puckers slightly. But hey, it's no longer drafty. In Viking terms, that's haute couture. The fire crackles behind you. The light from the smoke hole shifts as clouds pass overhead, giving the Longhouse a moody glow. You lean back, satisfied. One chore done, one tunic saved, one goat successfully evaded. That's a win in any age. And then, as if summoned by your smugness, the pig snorts and knocks over a water pail. Someone shrieks, the goat bolts, and the old dog barks once before deciding it's not his problem. You sigh, get up, and go grab a mop made from bundled reeds. Just another relaxing morning in the Longhouse. You're wringing out the mop. Well, reed bundle with ambition is more accurate. When your uncle lumbers in from outside, snow dusting his shoulders like icing on an extremely weathered cake. His beard holds small icicles, and he carries the kind of expression that says, "Yes, I stepped in something terrible. And no, I'm not emotionally ready to talk about it." "Seal's still frozen," he mutters, dropping his gear with a thud that echoes through the beams. "Net's caught, and someone's been at the fish barrel again." You try not to look guilty. The herring from earlier is currently sitting like a rock in your belly, slowly reminding you why midnight snacks are a dangerous gamble. While your uncle warms himself by the fire, holding his hands over it like he's demanding it apologize, you're asked to help prepare something truly sacred in this household. The mid-morning broth. It's not glamorous. It's not even particularly appetizing. But it's warm, and that's half the battle in a Viking winter. You fetch a large iron pot and fill it with water from the bucket. Into this go shavings of dried root vegetables, some fatty meat scraps from last night's stew, and a handful of barley. The resulting concoction will simmer for hours, turning into something vaguely soup-adjacent and deeply appreciated. You stir the pot slowly, methodically, as steam rises in curling fingers, carrying the scent of salt, smoke, and rooty defiance. The Longhouse begins to smell like life again, earthy, warm, and just a touch suspicious. Like it's daring you to guess the ingredients. As you stir, your mind drifts. You think about the sagas, those long, winding stories your grandfather tells after dark, where heroes pull swords from frost giants and accidentally marry the wrong twin. And while he always insists every word is true, historians still argue whether these oral traditions were strict records or glorified gossip with a long memory. In your experience, most of them sound like someone lost a bet and had to explain it with poetry. Across the room, your cousin is struggling with the loom. Again. She's got thread in places thread should never be, and the look of someone rethinking all her life choices that led to this point. You offer a weak smile. She glares back, tangled and bitter. You focus back on the pot, adding a pinch of salt and a tiny knob of last year's butter. It dissolves slowly, releasing the unmistakable smell of something approaching comfort. Someone behind you murmurs, "Smells like Thori," referring to the deep winter festival where everyone eats terrifyingly preserved foods and pretends it's fun. The broth simmers on, and you take a seat nearby, letting the heat warm your knees. Around the hearth, others are mending nets, carving spoons, or just sitting in thoughtful silence. The hum of quiet activity fills the air, underscored by the occasional goat sneeze and the steady drip-drip of meltwater from the beams above. This moment of soft routine, of hands working and minds drifting, is where the Viking day really takes shape. Not in raids or battles or the rowdy stuff that bards sing about, but here, in the slow stitching of daily life. The patient rhythm of survival. You grab your own bit of wool and start spinning it around a drop spindle just to keep your fingers busy. You're not good at it. Your thread wobbles like a nervous eel. But still, it helps. It keeps your mind anchored in the gentle now. Someone passes by behind you, muttering about the door letting in too much wind. You hear them adjusting the seals with more straw and a heavy stone. Viking insulation. One part ingenuity. One part hoping winter forgets you exist. You catch your grandmother whispering a rune under her breath as she adjusts the pot. She claims it helps the broth thicken faster. You're skeptical, but the last time you questioned her kitchen magic, your eyebrows smelled like garlic for a week. As the broth bubbles, you're asked to set out the communal bowls, wooden, mismatched, many of them older than you. One has a notch where your uncle swears he deflected a spear with it. Another is shaped like a boat, and probably not on purpose. You arrange them neatly around the hearth, careful not to trip over the sprawled dog, who's snoring with the deep contentment of someone who knows their only job today is to occasionally bark at wind. As you sit back down, you overhear your great-aunt humming again, the same song from earlier. You lean in and ask about it. "Old song," she says, "from before we came across the water, for keeping the wolves away and the children asleep." You nod slowly. You don't know if it works for wolves, but it's definitely making you drowsy. The room warms. The fire crackles gently. The broth simmers into something edible. You think you smell parsley, but you're not entirely sure it wasn't the goat again. You stir once more, just because you can, and realize that for now, everything's where it should be. The people, the animals, the half-broken spoon, even the snoring dog. In a world shaped by frost and storms and sagas, this moment of stillness might be the most valuable treasure of all. The broth is finally ladled into mismatched wooden bowls and passed around, each person cupping theirs like it holds more than just soup. Maybe it does. Maybe it holds the promise of not having to chop more firewood for at least an hour. You hold yours close, breathing in the steam as it curls up into your face like a shy ghost. It's not gourmet, but it's hearty. A little greasy, a little chewy. Possibly part turnip, possibly part something mysterious and unidentifiable. But it's warm, and it fills your belly with a gentle, sleepy weight. Someone lets out a low, satisfied sigh and smacks their lips. Your uncle, predictably. and you wonder aloud if he ever eats anything without sounding like he's writing a love poem to it. He grins at you, pieces of barley clinging to his beard. You immediately regret looking. This is the Longhouse's late morning lull. After chores, before midday work outside begins in earnest, there's a rare and fleeting moment of something close to leisure. A few people lean back against posts, their hands draped over their bellies. Others pick at half-done carvings or mend little leather pouches. One of the children is trying to tie her hair into braids, failing spectacularly. The goat is chewing on a bit of broom. Nobody stops it. You don't even know if you can stop it. Now comes a crucial decision. Do you stay inside and volunteer to help with a bit of weaving? Or do you step outside into the bitter wind to check the traps with your cousin? Neither option is particularly appealing. One promises cold fingers, the other guarantees tangled thread and possible judgment from your aunt, who weaves like she invented the loom. You hesitate too long. You are gently volunteered for weaving. You sigh, placing your now empty bowl aside and wiping your hands on a corner of your tunic that's only moderately dirty. Time to tangle with wool. The vertical loom is set up near one wall, the warp thread strung tight like harp strings waiting to catch your clumsiness. You take your place beside your aunt, who doesn't even look at you before saying, "Don't pull too tight this time." She's not wrong. Your last attempt turned a tunic into what can only be described as a wool corset. Fashion forward? Perhaps. Comfortable? Not even slightly. You begin weaving, sliding the shuttle back and forth, up and under, packing the wool in gently with a long comb. The movement becomes rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Your hands start to understand what your brain keeps overthinking. As you work, you listen. Not just to the murmuring conversations around you, but to the sounds of the Longhouse itself. The low creak of wood beams as the wind shifts, the flutter of birds above the smoke hole, the occasional drip of snow melting off the roof onto the packed earth floor. Even the goat makes a kind of chewing metronome, blissfully unaware of its soundtrack duties. Weaving, you've learned, is where some of the most meaningful stories get passed down. Not shouted like in the great hall, not dramatically told over firelight, but whispered here between patterns and knots. Your aunt tells you of the time she wove a tapestry so fine it ended up in the Jarl's hall, and how she was never paid in coin, just thanked with a broken comb and a song that mispronounced her name. Still, she says, it was a good song. You ask if it's true that some threads are dyed using crushed insects. She nods solemnly and says, "The red ones? It's always the red ones." You stare at the red stripe on your sleeve a little longer than necessary after that. She continues, spinning tales alongside yarn, of far-off trade ships bringing silk all the way from the east, of a loom that once snapped mid-weave and was declared cursed, of a woman in a neighboring village who claimed her weaving patterns came to her in dreams sent by Freya herself. Historians still argue whether women in Viking households held significant religious influence through domestic roles like weaving. Some believe these textiles carried symbolic meanings, a coded language of gods and omens stitched into every cloak and curtain. Others think this might be modern over-romanticizing. But sitting here beside your aunt, watching her lips move as surely as her fingers, you can't help but believe there's magic in the wool. The loom creaks, and you glance at your work. It's not perfect, but it's holding. The pattern is mostly straight, and nothing's exploded yet. Small victories, woven one line at a time. You take a break and stretch your back, noticing how the smoke in the Longhouse seems to drift lazily today. Soft ribbons floating toward the open smoke hole above. Someone throws more peat onto the fire, and the air takes on that rich, earthy smell again. Familiar, slightly musty. Comforting in a way that smells shouldn't logically be. Your cousin returns from outside with a triumphant grin and a sack full of very annoyed-looking fish. One of them is still twitching, and she holds it like a prize while snow drips from her hair. You raise your eyebrows. She shrugs. 2 traps snapped shut. One had a frog in it. She doesn't elaborate. You set your weaving aside, and your aunt pats your hand. Better, she says. That's the Viking equivalent of a standing ovation. The household begins to stir again, moving toward preparing the next round of meals, tending to more chores, checking on drying hides and stored grain sacks. You're sent to help check the larder, well, the buried food pit near the back of the house. It's a simple task. See if any mice have decided to host a festival down there. You lift the cover carefully. No mice, but a faint scent of sour milk tells you one of the cheese sacks didn't make it. You sigh and make a mental note to bring it out to the waste heap later. For now, you rearrange the sacks of dried peas, dried cod, and a questionable slab of something labeled boar, and head back. Your hands are dusty and cold, your nose is running just a bit, and your tunic has a mysterious red mark that might be bug dye, soup, or goat paint. You're not sure. But as you settle back by the fire, grabbing the now dry tunic you mended earlier and folding it with exaggerated care, you realize something else. You feel oddly peaceful. There's a cadence to this life. A rhythm. It's not all glory and raiding and shouting over waves. Sometimes it's just you, a loom, a goat with boundary issues, and a pot of soup that smells like wet socks and comfort. And that's more than enough. Your hands are finally warming again, nestled around a steaming mug of sour apple herbal tea. Technically, it's just hot water with dried crabapple peel floating in it. But in Viking terms, that's practically a luxury spa beverage. You sip slowly, the tartness making your eyebrows twitch, and you lean back on a bench draped with sheepskin, watching the daily gears of the Longhouse turn. The midday light trickles in through the smoke hole above, casting faint shafts across the dusty air. You can see the tiny motes drifting like lazy fireflies. If you squint and let your mind go soft, it looks like stars spinning in some slow celestial churn. Or maybe that's just the crabapple tea hitting your system. Next to you, your younger brother is trying to whittle a fishhook from bone. He's not succeeding, but he's very determined, and at one point he stabs himself in the thumb just slightly. You both pretend not to notice, because Viking pride is fragile, and acknowledging small injuries is only allowed if there's dramatic blood involved. This is merely a character-building poke, as your grandfather would say. Elsewhere in the Longhouse, the women are finishing up the mid-morning cleanup. This means collecting any dropped bits of wool, reshaping the fire embers, and the ever-pleasant task of checking the chamber pots. One of them is carried outside in a delicate balance act that nobody wants to see go wrong. You're pretty sure that pot has its own dark history. You've been asked to help bring in a bucket of snow. Yes, snow. Not for cooling things, but for melting down into drinking water, because the barrel outside is frozen solid, and the last time someone chipped away at it, the chunk that flew off broke a window shutter. You trudge out into the cold again, boots crunching over the frozen ground. The world outside is breathtakingly still. Snow blankets everything, the woods beyond the settlement softened into quiet sculpture. You breathe in, and your nose immediately regrets it. There's no such thing as gentle air here, just a cold that slaps you on the way in. You fill the bucket quickly, using your mitt to scoop up snow from a relatively clean drift. You avoid the area near the animal pen, for reasons that don't need explanation. When you return, the warmth of the Longhouse hits you like a slow exhale, and you let out a sigh that fogs the air in front of you. The snow bucket is passed to your grandmother, who starts melting it over the fire, humming again. It's a different tune this time. Lower, slower. You ask what it means. This one's about a woman who married the sea, she says simply, like that clears everything up. You don't ask follow-up questions. Sitting nearby, your grandfather is mending one of the shields. Not for war, those are stored elsewhere, but for ritual and ceremony. Painted with knotwork and faded blue swirls, it's used in the seasonal rites that mark the turning of the sun. He's carefully repainting the spiral with a brush made from a raven feather, muttering about how the last person to clean it didn't understand the sacredness of the swirl. You don't volunteer. Historians still argue whether Viking shield patterns carried deeper meanings or were simply artistic flair. Some believe they identified specific families or clans, while others think they might have offered magical protection, symbols to distract the enemy or ward off bad luck. Either way, your grandfather's dead serious about his swirls, and you're not about to challenge that. You go to check the drying herbs near the rafters. They're strung up in neat bunches: dill, thyme, a bit of bog myrtle. Some are for cooking, some for medicine, and a few are just there to make the goat sneeze. You pluck down a bundle of dried nettle and pass it to your aunt, who grinds it into powder for a soothing balm. She offers you a small dab for your wind-chapped cheeks. It smells like wet grass and regret, but it works. You thank her, and she responds with a nod, and the kind of silence that says, "You're welcome," in fluent Viking. Someone near the fire starts strumming a lyre. It's missing a string and slightly out of tune, but no one seems to mind. The sound is gentle, repetitive, plinking along like water over rocks. The melody weaves through the air as people go about their business, wrapping the Longhouse in its soft notes. You sit back again, letting the warmth seep into your bones. You pick up a bit of embroidery. Not your usual task, but you're bored, and your cousin left the needle in the wool anyway. You stab at it slowly, trying to imitate the fox pattern she started. The result looks more like an abstract cloud. You decide it's a fox seen from a very confusing angle. Around you, people chat in low voices about the weather, the condition of the sled runners, the fact that someone's mittens keep disappearing, and whether the next full moon will be clear enough for a proper blessing. Then, just as your eyes start to get heavy, someone yells from the entrance, "Smoke on the horizon!" Everything stills for a heartbeat, but then your father looks up from where he's been oiling a leather harness and says, "Probably Halbjorn's place. His chimney's always leaking." Everyone waits a beat, then nods and returns to their tasks. It's not a raid. It's not an omen. It's just Halbjorn being Halbjorn, and no one's hauling through snow for that unless they're screaming. You sigh and settle back into your wool. The goat has taken your seat. You don't fight it. You just sit somewhere else. That's how goat politics work in this household. Someone starts retelling a well-worn tale about the time they found a sea serpent egg near the fjord. Nobody believes it, but everyone listens anyway, adding their own exaggerated memories and imagined sightings. By the end, the serpent has wings, a beard, and a fondness for smoked herring. The lyre plays on. The broth is reheated. Snow melts in the bucket. Threads tangle, and the goat snorts in its sleep. This is midday in a Viking longhouse, a blend of purpose and pause, of hushed chatter and simmering chores. No battles, no bloodshed, just the quiet ceremony of keeping warm, fed, and together. You're back outside again, though this time it's voluntary. Sort of. You drew the short straw, or more accurately, were the last to pretend you didn't see the straws being drawn. And now it's your turn to tend the firewood. Not collect it. That's a different, colder punishment. But to sort and stack it properly near the longhouse wall, under the slanted overhang that pretends to be a roof. Your boots crunch through old snow and crusted ice as you reach the woodpile. The logs are frozen stiff, the kind of stiff that feels personal, like they resented being chopped in the first place, and now they've decided to become part of the permafrost out of spite. You grab one, and it bites your glove with splinters. Rude. Stacking wood might not sound like much, but there's an art to it. At least, that's what your grandfather insists every single time he catches someone doing it wrong. The key is to let the air move, he says. Logs need to breathe. You have yet to meet a log that wheezes, but sure, okay. Your breath fogs in front of you as you work. A rhythmic thud and shuffle echoing through the stillness. Every few minutes, you stop to shake out your fingers and admire the spectacular nothingness around you. The snow-covered ground rolls out toward the hills, where the trees look like spears driven into the earth, their dark tips poking at the dull winter sky. You hear voices behind you, the unmistakable squabbling of two cousins sent to clean the ash pits. You feel a sudden smug affection for your frozen logs. As you shift a particularly heavy one, you uncover a tiny footprint in the snow. Could be a fox, or possibly a very determined squirrel. You consider following it before remembering your current status as a human icicle. Another time, little forest friend, back inside the Longhouse, the air swallows you again like warm bread. Someone offers you a bit of dried apple, tart, chewy, and deeply satisfying in a way that modern snacks could only dream of. You nibble and flop down near the fire, cheeks glowing with the kind of cold that feels like you earned it. The goat has moved to someone else's seat. You feel vindicated. Across the fire, your uncle is oiling his boots. They're tall, fur-lined, and deeply offensive to anyone who has ever tried to make symmetrical stitches. He tells you they were a gift from a Sami trader, made with reindeer hide and endless patience. Whether that's true or not is anyone's guess, but he tells it with such lazy confidence that it might as well be scripture. He also claims the boots once walked him across a frozen lake at night, guided only by the northern lights and the yodeling of a drunk shepherd. You decide not to ask follow-up questions again. Historians still argue about the nature of Viking trade networks and whether personal tales like these reflect wider economic realities or simply colorful exaggeration. Evidence suggests both possibilities, really, and neither cancels the other out. What's certain is that these people were always in motion, even in the cold, even when food was scarce. Trade happened, ideas moved, stories walked in those same worn boots. As your uncle flexes his toes, you're asked to help with another midday task, preparing wool for spinning. This involves carding it, a process that sounds fancy but mostly boils down to brushing out clumps of fluff with a pair of wooden paddles covered in small teeth. It's not glamorous, but it's weirdly satisfying, like petting a cloud with intent. You sit cross-legged and begin pulling the wool apart, teasing the strands into soft order. Your fingers come away dusty, slightly greasy from the lanolin. The smell is earthy, like sheep, smoke, and something faintly musky. It's oddly comforting, though a sneeze escapes you halfway through. Wool dust revenge. Your mother sits nearby, spinning the carded fibers into yarn with a drop spindle. It's an elegant, rhythmic motion, like watching someone stir time itself. You watch the twist travel up the thread as she drops and spins, drops and spins. You'll get the hang of it, she says, without even looking at you. I didn't say anything. You made that face again. Fair enough. You ask if she ever made her own spindle. She nods. Out of driftwood and a stone whirl. Found them both on the same day. Thought it was a sign. What kind of sign? That I should stop borrowing your aunt's things. Spinning was never just about making yarn. It's also a kind of meditation, a quiet rebellion against the cold. As the fibers wind tighter, so too does the sense of purpose. The sense that even when the wind howls and the animals are testy and the goat eats your mittens, you're still producing something, creating order from chaos, however fuzzily. One of the younger boys tries spinning and drops the spindle almost immediately. It rolls under a bench and the dog, oh yes, there's a dog, chases it like it's just become the most important stick in the world. Chaos resumes. The dog's name is Freki, obviously. Someone thought they were being clever naming it after Odin's mythical wolf. But Freki is the size of a particularly confident loaf of bread and afraid of loud sneezes. Still, he's family. He takes his job of barking at snowflakes very seriously. Eventually, the spinning is done for now. The new yarn is wrapped in hanks and set aside to be dyed later, probably with birch bark or woad, depending on what's not frozen solid. A lull falls over the house. It's not quite nap time, but it's getting close. People are quieter, movements slow. You stretch out near the hearth, where the embers are gently pulsing under a layer of ash. Someone puts a bit of sage and pine needles on to burn. Not for ritual, but just because it smells nicer than damp socks and unwashed wool. You lie on your side, watching the fire, your head resting on a folded cloak that smells faintly of leather and last week's porridge. You can hear the wind picking up outside again, brushing along the walls like a hand dragging across fur. The roof creaks, the fire pops, someone snores softly across the room. And through it all, you breathe slowly, deeply, surrounded by the scratchy, soft smell of wool, the faint drift of sage smoke, and the far-off promise of stew. Here, in this Viking longhouse, even chores can lead to calm. Even the frozen logs and lumpy snow carry rhythms worth following. And as you drift into that hazy space between wakefulness and sleep, you realize something simple and true. Survival in this place is made not through grand battles or icy voyages, but through teamwork, humor, and knowing when to let the goat have the last word. The light outside is slipping sideways now, a golden smear on the snow that you can glimpse through a crack in the shutters. Inside the longhouse, everything glows with the slow orange rhythm of early evening. Shadows stretch long and soft across the packed earth floor, and the air has that dusty warmth that smells faintly of wood smoke, wet wool, and boiled turnip. You stretch your legs and feel the quiet groan of muscles that spent all day pretending logs aren't heavy. You'd like to rest, but there's one final errand before dinner. Checking the meat storage. Not because you're hungry, though, let's be honest, always a little, but because it's your turn to check for signs of thieving. Not from people, from the dog. You slip on your cloak again, this time with less complaining because you've accepted your fate as an eternal popsicle. Outside, the cold greets you like an old frenemy. Brisk, familiar, slightly judgmental. The meat store is a small outbuilding packed with snow and lined with thick planks. Inside hang cuts of dried fish, smoked lamb, and what you hope is last season's goose. The smell is intense. A bouquet of "do not inhale too deeply," with a top note of "my ancestors were bold." You check the hooks. Everything seems in place, except for one suspicious pile of fur and feathers near the entrance. Freki again. You sigh and toss him a dried scrap because you're not heartless. He takes it with all the enthusiasm of a beast 3 times his size, tail flailing like a ship in a storm. His loyalty is easily purchased. Good dog. Back inside, the longhouse is shifting into dinner mode. There's movement, measured, communal, cozy, chaotic. You pass a woman mashing turnips with a carved spoon the size of your forearm. She doesn't look up, but she does mutter something about proper texture, as if you're personally responsible for the wrong sort of mash. Nearby, someone is slicing salted fish so thin it's practically transparent. They're layering it with herbs and yesterday's barley mush, rebuilding it like a savory lasagna from a much less forgiving time. You're handed a ladle. You don't question it. You just stir. The pot you're now responsible for holds a stew that has likely been simmering all day. Turnips, barley, wild onions, and a few mysterious green things that you're 80% sure aren't moss. As you stir, you hear the creak of the wooden ladle and the low bubble of broth. It's hypnotic, like a slow drumbeat calling everyone toward mealtime. Viking dinners weren't always feasts. Historians agree that while raiding parties might have boasted rich meals from foreign shores, most Longhouse meals were simple, hearty, and based on what hadn't frozen, spoiled, or been eaten by goats. What the records don't always reflect, though, is the ritual of it. The rhythm. The way mealtime was less about food and more about gathering close, warming up, and sharing stories both true and almost true. The table, really just wide planks laid atop sawhorse legs, is being set. Not with silver, but with carved wooden bowls, horn cups, and those curious curved knives that everyone insists on bringing to the table, like they're waiting for a duel with the soup. You sit, you eat. You try not to drop food into your lap, though your cloak is basically a full-body bib at this point. The stew is, surprisingly, decent. Salty and warm, and full of that chewy grain satisfaction that makes your jaw feel like it's been at the gym. The fish and herbs give it a hint of sea and soil, and someone passes a crust of flatbread that tastes like it was baked last week, and just remembered it had responsibilities. There's laughter now. Someone telling the story of the night the sled ran off with no one in it, and frightened the entire goat herd into the river. No one was hurt, but apparently the bleating echoed for hours, and one goat hasn't forgiven sleds since. The fire crackles. Bowls are scraped. Ale is poured. Fermented grain brew with the bitter charm of something half forgotten in a barrel. You sip politely and tuck your cup aside. A pair of children tumble past, chasing a bit of yarn like it's treasure. They trip over a dog, a stool, and nearly a cousin, before collapsing into giggles by the wall. No one tells them to stop. This is the safest they'll be all day. You lean back, full and warm, and feel the low hum of comfort settle into your bones. For a culture often associated with war and wind-battered ships, the Vikings were also masters of domestic survival. They built heat from bodies and broth, from layered cloaks and laughter, from good boots and better stories. And speaking of stories, now comes the part of the evening when someone starts one. Tonight, it's your aunt. The one with the voice like melted butter and a dramatic pause game strong enough to hush a whole room. She settles into her seat, takes a slow sip of her ale, and begins a tale about a ghost that lives in the lake, and only appears when the moon's reflection winks. Winks? Someone asks. Yes, she says, because a proper ghost doesn't just appear, it flirts. The story continues, growing stranger and softer as the fire dims. You watch the flames flicker, casting her shadow long across the ceiling beams. She has everyone's attention. Even the goat is still. No one really remembers how the story ends, but it doesn't matter. The point was the telling, the drift of it, the curling, sleep-laced quiet that follows a meal and a myth. Your head nods gently. Your eyelids flutter like they've heard this one before, and they probably have. Dinner ends with a murmur. Bowls are stacked. The dog is snoring. The kids are wrapped in sheepskins and dreams. You shift to a sleeping bench along the wall, tucking your cloak around you. The wood beneath you creaks just enough to feel real, not enough to disturb. Above you, bundles of herbs hang still. You swear one of them winks. Probably the ghost again. This is how evenings end here, with full bellies, flickering stories, and the slow drift into sleep under the heavy roof of a longhouse that, for all its roughness, cradles its people like a heartbeat. You wake, though not quite fully. It's that in-between stage. Eyes half-lidded, ears gently tuned to the hush of a longhouse, settling deeper into night. The fire has dwindled to a slow amber glow, shadows lapping gently against the timber walls. A few soft snores rise and fall around you, one of them suspiciously goat-shaped. But it's your shift now. You know it before anyone says a word. The rhythm of the house has a way of tapping you on the shoulder when it's your turn. time to tend the hearth. You slide from your bench, cloak wrapped tight around your shoulders, toes careful on the cold floor. Someone, probably your cousin, left their boots in the middle of the walkway again, which you barely dodge with the sleepy elegance of someone who's stubbed too many toes to do it again. Kneeling at the fire pit, you gently lift the iron poker and nudge the sleeping embers to life. A warm breath of ash drifts upward. You add a few pieces of kindling, then a log, tilting your head just right to dodge the inevitable puff of smoke that always finds your face. The fire responds, reluctantly at first, then with a steady flicker. You coax it like it's an old dog. Slowly, kindly, pretending you didn't see it try to die. It crackles once, like it forgives you. This is the Longhouse at its quietest. The outside world is gone. Snowfall, wind, the creak of trees bowing to the north. All that remains is breath and wood, and the occasional rustle of someone shifting in their sleep. You take a moment to sip water from a horn cup. It tastes slightly smoky, slightly woody, like everything here. You set the cup down quietly and tuck yourself into a lower bench beside the fire. Not sleeping, but not fully awake. Just present. Sometimes these midnight shifts are when the older ones tell stories. Not the fun ones. Those are for dinner. These are the secret ones. The layered, slow-telling tales passed down like mismatched mittens, full of half-truths and whispered warnings. Tonight, it's your grandfather. You didn't even notice him stirring, but there he is. Blanket around his shoulders, beard tangled like seaweed after a storm. He doesn't look at you. He just begins. Have I told you about the woman who married the ice? Yes, you say softly. He ignores you. Of course he does. There was a woman, he says, who lived so far north. The sun forgot how to find her house. Her hair froze solid in her sleep, and her soup never steamed. But she smiled, because she had a secret. She was in love with the ice. You lean your head back against the beam behind you. The story winds on, about frozen lakes that sang, about a man made of snow, about whether love could melt winter, or whether winter always wins. Historians still debate how much oral storytelling shaped Viking belief. We know the sagas were written down centuries later, and even then, often by outsiders or long-removed descendants. But before paper, before runes, there were nights like this. Voices around a fire, speaking things into permanence. Your grandfather's voice is gravelly but warm, like bark rubbed smooth by sea air. You close your eyes and let the words carry you, not into sleep, not quite, but into a kind of dreamy stillness. Eventually, the story fades. He stops mid-sentence, the way he always does, like the ending is yours to imagine, or like he forgot it. Probably both. He pats your knee once, a rare show of affection. Then he turns and shuffles back to his bed. You sit in the fire's glow, watching the shadows climb the beams. You know you should lie down again, but something keeps you in place. Maybe it's the quiet, or maybe it's the odd sense of being part of something very old, very ordinary, and very sacred in its own sleepy way. You glance toward the door. A draft sneaks under the hide curtain. Just beyond that barrier lies a night, colder than sense itself. But inside, here, is the soft heartbeat of life carried through winter. There's a muffled cough. Then silence again. The embers pulse. You finally move to your bench. The fur there is still warm from before, and you wrap yourself into it like dough around a filling. Sleep waits just behind your eyes. You let it come slowly. As you drift, your mind wanders. To the woman who married the ice, to the goats you'll have to chase tomorrow, to the way the fire always sounds like it's telling its own story, one crackle at a time. And maybe, just maybe, you dream. Not of battles, or ships, or gods, but of warm bowls of stew, quiet chores, and the way your breath fogs in the Longhouse light. Because this is your world, your morning routines, your nights warmed by embers and ancestors, and in the slow rhythm of this Viking life, where even fire needs tending and stories never really end, you find something quietly perfect. The kind of peace that only arrives when you know your place, your people, and how to relight a flame. You wake up before the sun again. Though that's not saying much, since in this northern winter, the sun seems to have taken a prolonged vacation. Still, something nudges you awake. Maybe it's the unmistakable sound of snow sliding off the roof like a lazy bear. Maybe it's the goat bleating like it's composing a saga of personal injustice. Or maybe it's just your back reminding you that benches are not mattresses. You stretch beneath the heavy fur, limbs slow and reluctant, like they've grown moss overnight. Around you, the Longhouse stirs gradually. Someone coughs. Someone else mutters something unprintable about frostbite and the betrayal of toes. Your first task today is a humble but deeply important one, repairing clothing. You sigh, not out of dread, but of acceptance. Needlework is the silent tax of Viking life, quiet, repetitive, and utterly necessary. After all, wool doesn't darn itself, and torn seams don't magically seal just because you glare at them. You settle near the hearth, still glowing softly from your night tending it. The warmth helps with your fingers, which currently feel like twigs dipped in cold porridge. You gather the repair pile. A sock with a hole big enough to qualify as a window, a tunic sleeve that's more gap than fabric, and, of course, a pair of wool trousers that have somehow acquired scorch marks. You don't ask. The needle is bone, worn smooth from use, and the thread is spun wool, uneven but serviceable. You begin to stitch, rhythmically, carefully, as the household stirs fully awake around you. It's a strangely calming ritual. Stitch by stitch, you reclaim usefulness from wear. Viking clothing wasn't just about warmth, it was wealth, too. Good wool was valuable, dyed fabric even more so. A tunic passed down through generations might carry the smell of 3 grandfathers and half a saga. Historians agree that the Norse were surprisingly fashion-forward. In fact, fragments of colored cloth from burial sites show careful weaving patterns and even decorative embroidery. A warrior might die with a sword in hand, yes, but also with a rather fetching crimson sash. Priorities. But not everyone had fancy dyes or imported silk. Most days your wardrobe is 50 shades of oatmeal. Grays, browns, muted greens. Every once in a while someone shows up in blue, and you all squint like it's hurting your eyes. Across the room, your aunt is combing wool. The gentle rasp of the wool cards is oddly soothing. She has the focus of someone untangling philosophy from sheep fluff. Occasionally she mutters to herself, probably composing insults to hurl at moths. Your cousin is spinning. Not dramatically, just sitting with her drop spindle, twisting wool into thread with a motion so fluid it's almost hypnotic. You've tried it. Your results resembled a tangled caterpillar having a breakdown. You respect the art from a distance now. You finish the sock and move on to the tunic. A small tear, likely from someone forgetting that brambles are not clothing friendly. As you work, you remember how this tunic was worn last summer during the sheep shearing contest, where your uncle bet half a barrel of ale he could shear 3 sheep in the time it took your cousin to sing the goat song. He lost. But he sang along anyway. You smile at the memory. It's stitched into the fabric now, just like everything else. Clothes in this world aren't disposable. They're stories you wear, scars you mend, and sometimes a chance to sit still and contribute quietly. You glance around the Longhouse. The repair work has turned into a kind of silent group meditation. Everyone's stitching or combing or spinning. Even the goat is watching respectfully, though you're certain it's plotting to eat something woolen when you aren't looking. In one corner, a neighbor has stopped by to exchange a skein of dyed thread for some smoked fish. Barter is the currency of the day. No coins, no receipts, just trust and a raised eyebrow. She shows off the thread. Soft red, dyed with madder root and pride. Your aunt inspects it like it might be hiding secrets. Then she nods. Trade approved. You briefly consider embroidering something silly on the tunic sleeve. A tiny sheep? A stealthy goat? But you remember the last time you got creative, and your cousin made you re-sew 3 inches of crooked seams. You sigh. Practical it is. Still, you make the stitches neat. Not because anyone will praise you, this isn't that kind of society, but because it feels good to do something well, even if it's just for a piece of clothing that smells like turnips and wet fur. Historians still argue whether women were the sole textile producers in Viking society, or if men participated more than previously assumed. But either way, everyone learned some of the basics. In winter, especially, these quiet tasks weren't just domestic. They were survival. You can't hunt without boots. You can't raid with cold toes. And you certainly can't flirt at a feast if your tunic looks like it lost a fight with a wolf. The day brightens ever so slightly outside. A pale gray creeps in around the hide curtain, barely qualifying as morning light. You squint. Nope. Still gloom. You go back to sewing. At last, the repair pile is finished. You lean back with the satisfaction of someone who has outwitted both moths and loose hems. You hold up the sock triumphantly. It still resembles a sock. Mostly. The rest of the household begins shifting to their next tasks. Someone is peeling root vegetables for lunch. Another is arguing with the goat again. You suspect the goat is winning. You set your mended clothes in the storage basket. Another piece of the day, stitched into place. Outside, someone calls out. Probably about firewood or a broken fence, or the sudden arrival of more snow than anyone emotionally prepared for. You stretch your legs, crack your knuckles, and get ready to move on. But for now, for this quiet hour, you were a tailor, a weaver of wool, a mender of socks. And it turns out, that's enough. Your legs still remember the floor's chill as you rise and dust off the last flecks of wool from your lap. Needlework done, you head outside. Not far, just to the sheltered patch near the door where the water barrels sit. Ringed in frost like iced cakes no one dares eat. Fetching water isn't glamorous. It isn't even moderately interesting. But it's part of the rhythm, and you've come to appreciate its quiet ritual. The barrel is half frozen, as usual. You knock off the thin sheet of ice with a stick that's been thoughtfully designated for this very purpose, though it looks suspiciously like someone's old walking stick. The ice breaks with a satisfying crack, like frozen parchment. You scoop the water into a wooden pail. It's cold enough to sting through your gloves, and you don't dawdle. Inside, this will be heated, added to porridge, to stew, to tea, though Viking tea mostly means hot water with herbs, maybe honey if you're lucky, and moss if you're desperate. Back in the Longhouse, a kettle is already hanging over the fire, suspended on the iron pot hook that swings just slightly with every movement, like it's nodding at you approvingly. You add your bucket's contribution and settle down to help with the next big step in everyone's day, preparing the communal meal. There's no strict breakfast, lunch, dinner rhythm here. You eat when there's food, when there's fire, and when no one's trying to convince a stubborn sheep to return from its latest escape attempt. But usually, the mid-morning meal is hearty, hot, and involved. Today's ingredients await you like familiar friends. Barley, onions, dried herbs, a wedge of aged cheese, and the ever-present dried fish that seems to follow you in your dreams. You and two others begin slicing, stirring, and muttering about whether this batch of barley tastes more like earth or dirt. Cooking in a longhouse is less about recipes and more about instincts, smell, taste, and the mysterious art of not burning things when everything is made of wood. The hearth is the center of it all, and the fire crackles warmly as a pot of barley stew begins to bubble. You toss in the dried fish, earning a few predictable groans. Someone always pretends to be scandalized by it, but they still ask for seconds. It's Viking comfort food after all. Warm, filling, slightly fishy, deeply nostalgic. As you stir, you think about how central food is, not just for survival, but for bonding. Everyone helps, everyone shares. There's no individual meal prep here, no sad desk lunches. You're fed by the hands of people who saw you try to fix a goat harness with a shoestring last week. It's humbling, and also comforting. Historians generally agree that Viking meals were simple, hearty, and locally sourced. Part necessity, part philosophy, and part, well, the fjord isn't growing bananas. Grains like barley and rye were staples, with vegetables, preserved meats, and whatever could be foraged thrown in. While sagas mention mead and roasted boar, the daily meal was far less glamorous. But occasionally you do get the good stuff. Someone breaks out the cloudberries. Someone else has cheese that doesn't smell like existential dread. Once, your uncle brought back a chunk of dried apple from a coastal trader, and you all took turns nibbling it like it was treasure, which, in a way, it was. As the stew thickens and the smell spreads through the house, people begin hovering. You threaten to beat them back with a ladle if they try to sneak a taste before it's ready. They laugh. One does it anyway. You chase them halfway to the goat stall before returning, victorious with your ladle intact. The pot is ready. Bowls are filled. It's not a feast, but it's hot, and there's plenty. You sit elbow to elbow on the bench, warm wood at your back, and dig in. The fish still tastes like the ocean mixed with memories. The barley is chewy and grounding. You find a small bit of garlic in your bowl, a surprise twist, like the story of Thor's missing hammer. Eating together is loud in its own cozy way. There's chewing and chuckling, the occasional belch, and one person who insists on telling a story mid-bite. It's the kind of mealtime chaos that makes you feel alive, and like you'll definitely be wiping stew off your tunic later. You finish your bowl and sit back, full and drowsy. Someone offers you a bit of honey-sweetened milk. You accept, even though you know your cousin probably dipped their finger in it earlier. It's tradition. And anyway, the fire will probably kill the germs. Probably. As bowls are cleared and stacked, the longhouse returns to its slower rhythm. Tasks await, yes. But for this brief moment, everyone is full, content, and a little too warm to move quickly. You help wash the wooden bowls with hot water and sand? Yes, sand. Viking dishwashing is equal parts scrubbing and abrasion. There's a lot of elbow grease and not much in the way of lemon-scented soap. Still, the wood gleams when you're done. You set the bowls aside and take a breath. The fire pops once, like it's congratulating you. Your belly is full, your chores are half done, and the longhouse hums with quiet satisfaction. It's strange, you think. Not how hard life is, but how soft the moments between can be. A steaming bowl, a patch of sunlight on the floorboards, a shared joke about whether the goat is secretly possessed. Historians still debate whether the Norse had formal mealtimes or if eating was more opportunistic. But in this house, it doesn't really matter. The meal is not just sustenance. It's community, routine, and warmth in a world that sometimes forgets to be kind. You gather your cloak and stretch again. Outside, the wind is picking up. But inside, you're fed. You're warm, and you've survived another meal without being accused of oversalting the stew. A small victory, perhaps. But in Viking life, Small victories stack up, like stones in a hearth, keeping the world at bay. You step back outside into the pale light, the sort of daylight that feels more like a rumor than a promise. The air bites gently at your cheeks. Nothing aggressive, just a firm reminder that this isn't a season for lingering. But you have a task now, and it involves wool, rope, and a handful of very opinionated sheep. The morning stew still sits warmly in your belly, making your limbs slower, but your mood better. You pull your cloak tighter, adjust your belt, and head toward the small fenced enclosure beside the Longhouse, where the sheep, bless their silly, stubborn souls, await their daily drama. One has already escaped. Naturally. It's standing on the wrong side of the fence, chewing smugly on a frozen shrub, as if this is all part of a larger rebellion. You sigh. You don't even react anymore. This is just Tuesday. Before herding, you check the pen. Wooden stakes bound with rope, weather-worn but holding firm. The fencing needs constant maintenance, especially since your sheep possess the uncanny ability to locate every single weak point, like fluffy little engineers of chaos. Sheep were vital in Viking daily life. Not only for meat, but especially for their wool. Viking society spun it into clothing, sails, bedding, and more. In fact, sailcloth was a major export, and it took hundreds of hours and many sheep to produce a single one. So, despite their vacant stares and occasional existential bleats, these creatures were the textile backbone of your world. You herd them toward the small lean-to, where they'll be brushed, checked for illness, and, if you're lucky, cooperate for about 6.5 seconds. You cluck your tongue, raise your arms wide, and perform the Viking version of interpretive dance that passes for sheep guidance. They move, slowly, disjointedly, with the kind of unity found in poorly organized parades. But they move. One lamb attempts to eat your sleeve. Another bolts and loops around the hay pile twice, before giving up out of sheer boredom. You mutter under your breath. The goat watches from the other side of the yard, amused. You pretend not to notice. Eventually, the flock is corralled under the lean-to. You settle onto the milking stool, not for actual milking, just for the brushing and occasional inspection. With a carved wooden comb, you begin teasing out clumps of wool from their thick winter coats. It's oddly satisfying, like peeling dried glue from your hand, or watching someone organize a chaotic drawer. The wool you collect now won't be sheared until late spring or summer, but combing helps prevent matting, keeps them cleanish, and gives you a sense of how healthy the flock is. As you work, you notice a small patch of odd discoloration on one ewe's side. Could be nothing. Could be lice. You'll keep an eye on it, and maybe rub some pine resin salve there later. An old trick your grandmother swore by, even if it smells like a forest after a thunderstorm. Historians still argue whether sheep herding in Viking society was mostly women's work, or whether it rotated depending on season and status. Based on your experience, it's whoever can catch the sheep without spraining an ankle. You finish brushing the fluffiest of the group, your sleeves now covered in fibers, and move to inspect the hooves. It's not glamorous, but it's important. A limp in winter can spell disaster. You clean out mud, ice, and something that might be a beetle, but you don't look too closely. One of the lambs climbs halfway into your lap and falls asleep. You don't move. You're not heartless. After some time, and with a few creative bribes of dried moss, you finish up. You let the flock roam again inside the pen, where they immediately pretend none of this happened and resume headbutting each other like bored siblings. Back inside, your cousin is carding wool near the fire, and you bring in the handful you collected, handing it over like a tribute. She examines it approvingly, pulling out a twig, a feather, and a mysterious piece of eggshell. You shrug. Sheep are complicated. You warm your hands over the hearth and consider your next task. Wool is a part of nearly everything you do. It clothes you, warms you, trades for things you can't grow. It's your currency, your insulation, your comfort. And yet, you spend most of your time chasing it through frozen mud while muttering unprintable words. Someone else in the Longhouse offers a bit of flatbread with honey scraped on it. A luxury, and probably leftover from yesterday's celebration. You take it gratefully. It sticks to your teeth and your soul. You sit on the bench near the entrance, chewing slowly, watching bits of wool float in the air like sleepy dust motes. You think of the days to come. More combing, more spinning, maybe even helping your uncle with sail patches if the thaw holds. You think of the long summers when the sheep nearly shear themselves just to escape the heat. You think of the loom in the corner, where threads become story. And you think of your lap companion from earlier, now lying sideways in the pen with the kind of satisfaction only sheep and toddlers know. You're not just tending livestock. You're preserving warmth, crafting cloth, and helping prepare for voyages not yet taken. This wool, in someone else's hands, might become a banner or a shroud, or the lining of a winter cloak that saves a life. For now, it's just soft and stubborn, and yours to care for. The wind howls faintly outside, but the fire crackles in reply. You stretch content. One sheep snorts at you through the door crack. You snort back. The sheep, now mercifully settled and no longer launching rebellions from their pen, fade into the background hum of your daily routine. You brush stray bits of wool from your cloak and re-enter the Longhouse, catching the earthy scent of damp wood and herbs clinging to the air. But before you can settle, someone hands you a bundle of tangled rope and points to the tool wall with a very familiar expression. Equal parts pleading, and you're the only one who understands knots around here. And so, rope maintenance it is. The ropes in question are flax-twisted and wool-blended, not quite strong enough for ship work, but perfect for hauling hay bales or securing buckets on sledges. They live a hard life, dragged, soaked, frozen, gnawed on by goats with boundary issues. Every few days, they need a little love, unknotting, drying, and rewinding. You sit cross-legged near the hearth where it's warmer, holding the rope up to the firelight. It's stiff and smells like barn dreams and damp socks, but it's work that warms your fingers and gives your mind a place to wander. You hum a bit as you go, tugging each length taut, checking for frays. Vikings made their own rope from scratch, of course, spinning long plant fibers or animal sinew into usable lengths. Some say they chewed flax strands to soften them before twisting. You're not planning to chew anything, but it's comforting to know your ancestors were that committed to their crafts. One strand is beyond saving. You toss it into the fire, where it curls like a sleeping snake and blackens without fanfare. A tiny puff of smoke rises up, scented with old sweat and dry hay. You cough once and lean back, rubbing your hands together. Someone drops a bone-handled knife next to you without speaking, a silent suggestion to repair the worn bindings on a wooden bucket next. You glance over. The bindings are loose, and the wood is warping just a little from the winter damp. So you switch tasks, unwinding a narrow length of waxed cord and tightening it around the base of the bucket. It squeaks in protest. Everything around here has its own voice, even the buckets. Especially the buckets. Repair is a daily part of life in the Longhouse. If it's not rope, it's tools. If it's not tools, it's clothing. And if nothing is breaking, that just means something is hiding, plotting to break dramatically when it's least convenient. Historians still argue whether Viking households divided these domestic repairs by gender or simply by skill and availability. Some suggest women led textile work and tool upkeep, while others believe it was far more communal and situational, like today, when you're handed rope one moment and buckets the next, simply because you happen to be nearby. As you work, your cousin returns from the smokehouse with arms full of dried fish and meat. The smell wafts through the Longhouse, sharp and familiar. Preservation is everything this time of year, and the fish will be rehydrated later in stew, or eaten as is by those who don't mind a bit of jaw strain. You nod as they pass and return to your task. Now you're reweaving the basket that carries firewood. It split yesterday under the weight of a particularly ambitious armload of birch logs. You work the softened willow branches into place, weaving them in and out like a rhythm, like a heartbeat. A young child watches you, fascinated. You offer them a broken branch to practice with. They sit beside you, tongues sticking out in fierce concentration as they attempt their own mini version. The results are abstract, but the effort is adorable. You pause for a sip of water, warmed near the hearth to keep it from turning to slush in the bucket. Someone nearby asks if you'll help re-wrap the handle of a tool. Another small task. You agree. You're already in that kind of mood. Useful, content, mildly prickled with rope fibers. As you wrap the tool handle, you reflect on how few things are truly thrown away. Even broken things have potential here. Wood becomes kindling. Frayed cloth becomes patches. Old rope might bind a sled or hold open a door in summer. It's not hoarding. It's knowing that everything might have a second life. The fire pops again. You glance up and catch sight of the tool wall. Hooks, knives, awls, all hanging like well-behaved children. One is missing. You remember now. It's still buried in the snow somewhere from the last fence-mending incident. You make a mental note to dig for it when the sun's higher. Outside, the wind howls again, a low whistle slipping through the beams. You press your palm to the floor. It's cold, but not dangerously so. The Longhouse holds its heat well, thanks to thick turf walls and clever design. Low ceilings and layered materials to trap warmth where it matters. You finish the rope, coiled now like a sleeping serpent, and tuck it back into the wall. The bucket sits repaired beside it, proud and solid. The basket rests next to the hearth, ready for another load of firewood. The child beside you shows off their lopsided weave with triumph, and you ruffle their hair in approval. It's not grand work. There are no sagas about rope repair, but you know better than most that this is the glue of daily life. Quiet, repetitive, sustaining. And in these long, shadowy winters, that's exactly the kind of magic that keeps you going. You stretch your arms overhead, joints cracking like dry twigs. Around you, the house hums with quiet activity. A spindle whirs. Someone mends a tunic. A pot bubbles faintly. Even the goat outside seems momentarily at peace. You've mended rope, patched wood, and taught a child how to pretend a basket is a helmet. Not a bad way to spend part of a morning. There's always more to fix. But for now, you've made order from tangles. And that's enough. The light outside has shifted again, turning from dull gray to something that might pass as early afternoon if you squint optimistically. In truth, the sun never climbs very high in the sky this time of year. It just kind of hovers, like a lazy candle in a drafty room. Still, you take it as a signal. Time to step outside again. This time, it's the wood pile calling. You grab the firewood basket you repaired earlier. It creaks a little under your grip, but holds firm. And slip into your boots, which are still slightly damp from yesterday's snowmelt. Pulling your cloak tighter, you open the Longhouse door and step into the frigid brightness. Out back, just beyond the goat shed, and a curious chicken standing like a statue, lies the great pile. Your household's winter firewood, stacked with a combination of strategy and barely contained chaos. Some logs are neatly arranged, ends facing out. Others look like they were thrown there by a giant in a hurry. You know immediately which logs you'll go for first, the driest ones, tucked near the back under the overhanging thatch. You sink your arms into the pile, pulling out pieces that clack together like bones. Your breath clouds the air as you work. In the Viking world, gathering and chopping firewood wasn't just a winter chore, it was survival. A longhouse needed near-constant feeding, like a spoiled wooden dragon with a fire in its belly. Without steady fuel, warmth faded fast, especially in the corners where insulation was thin and cold crept like a curious ghost. Historians still debate whether firewood preparation was strictly a male task or shared among household members based on availability and urgency. In your experience, it comes down to this. If you've got arms and aren't already elbow-deep in fish guts or wool, congratulations, you're now in charge of firewood. The logs you lift are a mix of birch and pine, with the occasional oak chunk for long burns. Birch catches quickly, pine smells pleasant, and oak, when you have it, burns like a dream, but takes forever to split. You remember helping to chop some of this pile back in late summer, before the frost made everything harder. Swinging the axe, timing the strike, dodging splinters. It's oddly satisfying, though your shoulders complained for 2 days after. Your fingers start to sting from the cold, so you work faster, filling the basket to the brim. A log falls and nearly crushes your toes. You mutter something unrepeatable, then realize the chicken heard you. It looks mildly offended and walks away. Once loaded, you heft the basket and make your way back, boots crunching softly on the snow-dusted path. The longhouse door resists a little as you nudge it open with your hip, but soon you're back in the welcoming warmth and smells of smoked meat and damp wool. You carry the basket to the hearth, where the fire has shrunk to a quiet orange core. Someone left it unattended too long, probably distracted by sewing or an impromptu goat chase. You kneel, carefully stacking a few smaller birch twigs, then 2 larger logs on top. You give the embers a gentle stir with the fire poker, a bent iron rod with a decorative twist at the end, forged by your uncle last year. The embers spark and catch, flickering to life like a small sun reborn. As the flames rise, you lean in, soaking up the heat. Your cheeks thaw first, then your fingertips. The basket sits beside you, slowly steaming as the snow melts off the logs. You flip your cloak over your legs and settle onto a low stool. Just for a minute, a grandmother figure hums quietly as she stirs a pot over the fire, adding something green and pungent that makes your nose wrinkle. Medicinal stew, probably. Good for sore throats, bad for appetites. She gives you a knowing smile. You nod. She ladles you a small portion anyway. It tastes effective. You sip slowly, watching the flames flicker shadows across the rafters. The wood crackles and pops, releasing scents of forest, resin, and ancient summers long gone. A child passes behind you, dragging a sled made from a repurposed barrel lid and shouting something about snow dragons. You smile. You vaguely recall a time when snow dragons were a regular concern. The heat from the fire now wraps around your legs, cozy and convincing. But there's still one more task: redistributing the warmth. The hearth heats the central part of the longhouse best, but the sleeping alcoves along the walls get cold quickly, especially at night. You take a long iron pan, warmed near the coals, and carry it to one of the corner benches. Under the furs and bedding there, someone has placed stones, small, round, and dark from earlier hearth sessions. You swap them out, placing the freshly warmed pan atop the stones to slowly radiate heat. It's a simple system, but effective. Before pillows, before radiators, before electric blankets, there were stones and pans and patience. You check the others. A few need rewarming. You do the rounds, quiet and methodical, like a nighttime caretaker in a cozy museum. Historians still argue about just how cold Viking longhouses really got, and whether the central hearth truly kept the space livable year-round. But you know this: without constant tending, without the quiet ballet of wood and fire and care, things get uncomfortable very quickly. Your arms are sore, your legs stiff, and you're fairly certain there's a splinter in your thumb. But the fire is back to full strength, the wood is stacked, the stones are warm, and someone offers you the end of a honey-smeared flat cake as a reward. You accept it with a grateful hum, letting the sweetness dissolve on your tongue. Outside, the wind rustles the thatch. Inside, the flames dance and pop like old storytellers. You lean back, your shoulders relaxing against the bench. The room glows. And for a moment, it's just you, the fire, and the soft, enduring hum of a longhouse in winter. Your moment of fire-warmed bliss is gently interrupted by the rhythmic thunk of someone hammering outside, probably fixing the hinge on the storage shed, which has once again given up its will to stay closed. You sigh, not with frustration, but with the sleepy acceptance that in this life, something always needs mending, feeding, or tying down. You push yourself up from the bench and stretch slowly. Your back pops in a few places that suggest you've been hauling more wood than your ancestors ever intended. Still, the longhouse feels alive and comfortable now, like a giant breathing beast lulled into drowsiness by a full belly and a steady fire. You shuffle toward the storage alcove, past the drying herbs, the clay pots of pickled vegetables, and the basket full of something that is either a root or a very patient animal. At the rear of the longhouse, past the sleeping benches and low shelves, is a narrow wooden chest. A kind of early pantry, if you will. This is where the household stores its most useful treasures. You open the chest with a creak, and the gentle scent of dried rosemary and beeswax greets you. Inside, neatly arranged in layers of linen cloth, are various items of maintenance and care. Bits of bone used for shaping leather, soap made from ash and fat, sharpening stones, and, most importantly for now, the household grooming kit. Today, it's your turn to help with grooming. Yes, Viking grooming, the part of the day where history throws you a surprising curveball. Despite their battle-hardened image, Vikings were remarkably clean and cared about their appearance far more than most of their medieval peers. Archaeologists have found a surprising number of personal combs, tweezers, and even ear scoops in Viking graves. That's right, ear scoops. You take the grooming kit to the hearth and set it beside a low stool. An elder of the household sits down, pulls her cloak around her shoulders, and offers you a nod that says, "All right then, make me look as passably presentable as someone who just spent the last 2 weeks darning tunics in near darkness." You begin with the comb. It's made from smooth bone, with teeth worn slightly uneven from years of use. You gently begin working through the strands of hair, coarse, gray, and neatly braided. She winces once or twice as you tug at a stubborn knot, but offers no complaint. The combing is almost meditative. You fall into a slow rhythm, matching your breathing with each pass. Every now and then, she reaches up and gently swats your hand if she feels you're rushing. You're not. Not really. But time in this part of the longhouse feels slower somehow. She speaks softly, telling you about the time she met a walrus trader who swore by goat butter as a hair tonic. You nod solemnly, pretending not to be deeply unsettled by the idea. She grins. She knows. After the combing comes beard care. Your uncle's, this time. His beard is a force of nature, somewhere between a forest undergrowth and a bird's abandoned nest. You approach with the reverence of someone handling a small, bearded god. You work in some bear fat, smoothing down flyaways and shaping the beard into something less bird-like. He sighs contentedly, sipping from a clay cup of hot mead. You resist the urge to braid it into tiny horns. Barely. Historians still debate the exact frequency and style of Viking grooming rituals. Some point to foreign sources, like the famously cranky English monk who complained about Vikings luring local women with their excessive cleanliness, as proof that they bathed weekly and took pride in their appearance. Others argue that daily grooming was likely limited in colder months and more frequent when traveling or preparing for feasts. Either way, you're here now, gently wiping someone's ears with a bit of warmed cloth, because apparently ear scoops are where you draw the line. The children get combed next. They line up with varying degrees of enthusiasm, and you discover that one of them has hidden a goose feather in their braid. You consider scolding them, but honestly, it's kind of on theme. You let it stay. As you finish, you glance at the grooming kit again. There's a simple mirror in there. Polished bronze, slightly warped. You lift it and see yourself. Cheeks pink from the fire, hair in semi-controlled disarray, and a tiny smudge of ash on your nose from earlier. You shrug. Not bad. Someone offers you a twist of cloth scented with mint and moss. Viking tooth care wasn't exactly revolutionary, but they did seem to understand the value of fresh breath and occasional toothpicks. You rub the cloth over your teeth. Feels odd, tastes sharp. And try not to think about the absence of modern floss. There's a story told in some sagas about a warrior who stopped mid-battle to fix his hair, declaring that if he died, he wanted to look presentable in Valhalla. You respect that. There's something deeply human about wanting to feel clean and composed, even while surrounded by sheep, firewood, and one very judgmental chicken. Someone nearby chuckles at your expression and ruffles your hair, immediately undoing all your grooming progress. You sigh and pocket the comb. Outside, the light is already starting to fade again, though it's barely past mid-afternoon. That's winter for you. Long stretches of shadow stitched together by flickers of daylight. Inside the Longhouse, the grooming hour winds down. The combs are cleaned and returned, the mirror tucked away, and everyone looks slightly less windblown than they did an hour ago. You stretch your arms above your head and yawn. The warmth of the hearth is now matched by the gentle confidence of a clean face, combed hair, and the knowledge that, at least for today, your eyebrows are evenly shaped. Someone lights a second oil lamp, adding a golden flicker to the Longhouse's glow. The elder who spoke of goat butter hair tonic is now napping upright. The uncle's beard looks almost respectable, and the child with the goose feather is sitting proudly, hair neatly plaited, as if preparing to lead a war council made entirely of ducks. And you? You're just glad to be clean in a world that doesn't make it easy. With everyone brushed, oiled, and feeling vaguely regal, the Longhouse settles into what can only be described as the fidgeting hour. It's too early for the evening meal, too late to start anything ambitious, and too cold to go back outside unless absolutely necessary. So naturally, someone decides it's time to repair the fishing net. And you, of course, are recruited. You're handed the net like a sacred relic, its ropes twisted, dried, and tangled like a bundle of seaweed having an identity crisis. You carry it to the central hearth where the light is best, and kneel beside a pair of others already working their way through the snarled loops. Net repair is not glamorous. It's not heroic. It won't get your name in any sagas, and no one is composing an epic about the day the holes were finally patched. But it is essential. Without functioning nets, fish don't become dinner. And without dinner, well, you've got a long, quiet winter of grumbling bellies ahead. You ease into a comfortable sitting position and take up the bone netting needle, which looks like a tiny sword if you squint. One of the older boys hands you the next length of spun flax cord, already knotted at the end, and you get to work threading it through a gaping tear in the net's belly. The net smells faintly of salt and old river mud, comforting in its own briny way. Your fingers move slowly at first, looping and knotting with that particular mix of concentration and resignation common to all boring but necessary tasks. Over-under pull tight. Repeat. Historians still argue whether the majority of net-making was done at sea or back in the Longhouse. Evidence suggests both. Repairs and construction might happen wherever hands were idle and fish were needed. In coastal villages, communal net-making circles were common. Inland, each household likely maintained its own set, patching them seasonally between expeditions. You find the rhythm oddly hypnotic, your breathing syncing with the gentle pull and tuck of the net. Around you, quiet murmurs float through the smoke-hazed air. Someone is humming again. Someone else is gently snoring. One eye open just in case the goat gets bold again. Next to you, a younger child untangles a smaller net, more of a scoop net, used for trapping river eels or scooping trout from shallow streams. You guide their hands, showing them how to keep the tension even and the loops tight. They're clumsy, but eager. You remember learning the same way years ago, tying and retying the same loop until it looked vaguely symmetrical, getting praised for a job that, in hindsight, was objectively awful. But that's the Viking spirit. Keep doing it until it's useful, then teach someone else to do it slightly better. As you finish one section, you hold it up to the firelight. The repaired bit is clearly newer, brighter, tighter, but it'll hold. The satisfaction is modest, but real. Net-making also brings out the storytellers. Someone on the far side of the hearth launches into a tale about a fishing expedition gone terribly wrong, involving a beached whale, a broken net, and an impromptu wrestling match with a very determined seal. The details are hazy, but the dramatization is top-notch. You chuckle as you tie off your final loop. Your fingertips are starting to sting slightly. Netcord is not known for its kindness. You stretch your fingers out and glance toward the small pile of finished nets beside the hearth, neatly coiled like sleeping snakes. One of the elder women, seeing your hands, reaches for a small pot of salve. It's a soothing mix of sheep fat, pine resin, and crushed nettles. Yes, nettles. You flinch as she smears it on your knuckles, but the warmth kicks in quickly. She mutters something about young hands needing old oils and moves on. You're not sure if that's wisdom or sarcasm. Possibly both. You lean back, shoulders aching, and let your gaze wander up the rafters. Above, hung like laundry from the beams, are dried fish skins stretched taut. Some for preserving, others being turned into waterproof clothing linings, or even lantern material. Yes, fish skin lanterns. Not ideal for ambiance, but surprisingly effective in a pinch. The Longhouse continues its quiet hum of productivity. The netters move on to another section. The weaver switches out her shuttle thread, and someone quietly starts carving runes into a bit of bone. Likely a charm or a tally stick. The energy is calm, communal. Everyone pulling their quiet weight. You catch yourself nodding off, half upright, and decide that's enough productivity for the moment. You tuck the netting tools away in a small woven pouch, tying it with a bit of sinew. The pouch has your initials carved into the wooden tag. Not that many people here read runes fluently, but enough to know whose work is whose. There's a basket by the door for completed nets. You carefully place yours atop the pile, feeling oddly proud of the not-so-historic accomplishment. Someone murmurs that the weather is turning again. You glance toward the seams of the door and see the flicker of snow dancing just beyond the frame. It's not a storm, not yet, but it's coming. The fish will be harder to catch soon. The nets will be used less, then stowed carefully until spring's watery thaw. You smile to yourself, already picturing future mornings when the thawed river swells and you'll wade in, nets slung over your shoulder, hoping the fish are still foolish enough to swim toward bait. But that's a worry for another time. Right now your fingers are tired, your belly is starting to rumble, and the hearth is glowing just the way you like it. You settle down onto a fur-covered bench, folding your cloak tighter around your legs. Someone places a hot stone at your feet, and you curl your toes against it gratefully. Around you, the Longhouse breathes, flickers, mutters, dozes. And you, netmaker extraordinaire, let your eyelids droop, just for a minute. You don't so much rise from your fur-covered perch as pour yourself upright, joints cracking gently like twigs underfoot. The Longhouse has shifted once more into its pre-evening lull, the kind of hour that seems suspended in time. It's not quite dinner, not quite dusk, but it has that certain heaviness in the air, like everything is exhaling slowly, which means it's time for indoor chores. Again, today, you're tasked with one of the most thrilling duties this side of the North Sea. Scraping hides. Yes, the noble and endlessly aromatic task of transforming animal skins from floppy, vaguely wet trophies into something that won't make everyone gag when used as a blanket. You make your way to the low bench in the corner where the raw hides are stacked, thick with a smell that's somewhere between barnyard funk and wet dog. Two other unlucky souls are already there, sleeves rolled, expression grim. One hands you a wooden scraping tool. You take the reindeer, they mutter. Hey, oh joy. The hide is stretched out on a wooden frame, taut and speckled with the stubborn remnants of flesh and hair. Your job is simple. Scrape off everything that isn't supposed to be there while not tearing a single hole through the skin. You begin the work. It's slow, rhythmic, and incredibly satisfying in the way that only gross things can be. The scraper is curved and sharp, shaped from bone and smoothed by years of use. It fits in your hand like it was made just for you. Back and forth, the strokes peel away sinew and fat like curling orange peels. The smell intensifies, but you grow oddly accustomed to it. Occasionally, you pause to sharpen the scraper on a flat stone, then dive back in. Historians agree that hide processing was a vital domestic chore in Norse society, especially in the colder months when hunting peaked. Clothes, boots, tent flaps, cloaks, and even sails could involve animal skins at some stage. And although tanning, a more advanced and foul-smelling version of this task, often happened outside the home, the initial prep stages were common in the Longhouse, especially during stormy weather. You glance up at the others. One is humming a cheerful, tuneless melody while their fingers work the edge of a fox skin. The other is swearing softly at a stubborn bit of sinew that refuses to budge. You offer them your scraper. They decline, with exaggerated dignity. The best part of hide work is the mental drift. Your hands stay busy, but your mind wanders freely, sometimes into memories, sometimes into plans, and sometimes into very important questions like, would a walrus make a good pet if properly socialized? Spoiler, almost certainly not. The reindeer hide, for all its initial defiance, begins to yield under your steady strokes. You clear the last of the flesh, then rub in a mixture of crushed bark and wood ash, something like Viking pre-tanning. This helps prevent decay until someone can do the full tanning process, which involves even more delightful steps like soaking in stale urine. You remind yourself to be grateful you're not on that chore today. Someone behind you sneezes violently, shaking the dust from a hanging fur. Bless you, someone else mutters, then adds, you sneezed on the goose feathers again. A low groan follows. You don't ask. The hide, now scraped and powdered, is removed from its frame and hung over a low drying rack near the fire. It steams gently, like some sort of sacrificial blanket. You wash your hands in a wooden bowl of ash water and herbal rinse. The scent of thyme and smoke clings to your fingers. Much better than reindeer fat. Next up is sewing. You don't escape just because you finished scraping. Oh no, you're handed a heavy fur-lined boot with a split seam and told, "See if you can make that last another winter." You fetch the sewing kit from a nearby shelf, sinew thread, bone needles, and beeswax for coating the thread. Viking sewing is no delicate embroidery. It's all about strength, utility, and keeping the cold from biting at your toes while you're herding sheep or getting rained on at a thing meeting. You stab the needle through thick leather, pull the sinew tight, and coat the finished knot in a smear of wax. It holds. Barely. Someone will wear it tomorrow and report back whether their toes froze off. There's a strange comfort to this task. The boot in your lap, the fire crackling nearby, the soft murmur of stories starting to stir again around the hearth. One of the elders begins describing the last time they saw a sea eagle. Its wingspan as wide as a cart, its screech like Thor's hammer slamming into a mountainside. You think that might be exaggerated. But it's a good story. You nod along, even as you focus on your stitching. Historians still debate the extent of textile roles between genders in Viking society. While spinning and weaving were largely considered female-dominated tasks, leatherwork and hide prep were more communal, especially in smaller rural communities. Whoever had the hands available did the work. You finish the boot and pass it back. "It'll hold," you say, and someone offers you a chunk of dried fish as payment. You take it. You've eaten worse. Nearby, a cousin is darning a woolen sock while chewing on a bit of resin to clean their teeth. You sit beside them, your knees crackling as you lower yourself, and share the dried fish wordlessly. It tastes like the sea and smoke and perseverance. The conversation turns to old festivals, especially those that mark the turn of the seasons. There's talk of sacrifices, of dancing around fires, of baked oatcakes with herbs pressed into the top. Someone wonders if this year's solstice will bring a blizzard. Someone else wonders what they'll wear. You all pretend not to care, but everyone secretly does. The Longhouse now smells like warmed leather, smoked fish, and thyme. It's not unpleasant. It's alive. The kind of scent that clings to memories and makes you nostalgic for something you haven't even finished living through. As you begin patching a small tear in a cloak, you feel the gentle weight of the day settle in your shoulders. The steady press of small accomplishments, of tasks done not for glory, but for survival, and maybe a bit of pride. Outside, the snow begins to fall softly, blanketing the roof above with a hush. The goats complain once and are silenced by someone throwing a chunk of hay their way. Inside, the stitching continues, hide after hide, thread through leather, the kind of peace that only comes from being deeply, entirely useful. And you, happily nestled between fire and furs, don't mind a bit. You're still seated by the hearth, your hands now idle as the last thread is tied off and trimmed with care. The needlework is complete. For now. Around you, the mood has shifted again, like the light just before twilight. People move a little slower. Conversation fades into a quieter hum. You can practically feel the entire Longhouse taking a breath before the evening truly begins. But just when you think you might sneak off for a nap, someone beckons you with a sly grin and a bundle of straw in their arms. "Come on," they say. "Time to prep the beds." Of course, you forgot about that part of the day. The Viking bed, unlike your memory foam monstrosity back home, is more of a cleverly disguised wooden box. And inside that box, straw, lots of it. Plus maybe some dried moss, grass, old wool scraps, whatever's available and relatively non-stabby. But the thing is, it doesn't stay fluffy on its own. Not after a week or two of people sleeping, sweating, and shedding into it like molting bears. So tonight, you're on straw duty. You drag the old bedding out into the open and begin fluffing, shifting, and replacing the worst of it. As you toss a clump of flattened straw aside, a very disgruntled spider scurries off. You give it a moment to flee. Spiders are practically pets here, after all. Free pest control and all that. You grab the new straw. Dry, rustling, and fragrant like late summer fields. You start layering it in the bed frame, patting it flat in the middle, and fluffing it at the edges. There's a rhythm to this, too. A kind of nesting instinct that kicks in and makes you want to build the comfiest, coziest nest possible. You can even add dried herbs if you're fancy. Lavender if someone's hoarded it. Thyme or sweet woodruff for a soothing scent. And sometimes, if you're a real connoisseur, a sprinkle of juniper needles to keep bugs away and dreams a bit livelier. Historians believe Viking bedding was a mix of practical and personal, often layered with animal skins or thick woven blankets. Beds were sometimes built into alcoves for warmth, or separated with curtains for privacy, especially for elders or guests. Everyone else? It's cuddle or freeze. You finish stuffing one bed and move on to another. The children's bed is smaller, lumpier, and smells faintly of goat for reasons you don't care to explore. Still, you fix it. You're becoming an expert straw technician at this point. As you work, you overhear a discussion about dreams. Someone swears they saw Odin in their sleep, walking along the edge of a fjord, cloak dragging in the surf. Another claims they dreamed of flying, but only 1 foot left the ground at a time. That means something, they insist. It has to. You're not sure what it means, but you nod wisely as you replace another lump of straw with a slightly less lumpy one. Nearby, a woman is braiding a small charm out of dyed wool. She says it keeps away night stallions, a poetic nickname for nightmares. She tucks it beneath a fur pillow. Another child insists on sleeping with a carved wooden horse for luck. Yet another has a tiny pouch of dried berries tucked into their sleeping shirt. In case I get hungry while dreaming, they explain solemnly. Charming and possibly brilliant. Your own bed is last. You give it extra fluff, of course. It's earned it. You even scavenge a better fur from the drying rack, thick, bear-like, and luxuriously heavy. You pat it once with pride, then turn to the fire. Dinner's still a ways off, but someone's already begun to stir the cauldron again. You recognize the telltale scent of something root-based and bland, probably parsnip or rutabaga stew. You'll eat it anyway. Hunger makes the blandest things taste like feasts, and besides, it's warm. You ease down beside the fire, now surrounded by freshly layered beds and herbs. There's a brief moment where the warmth, the scent of straw and thyme, and the soft crackling of logs all align into one perfect pause. And then someone lets out a sharp curse. Oof da! As they step on a wooden toy in the dark. Laughter bubbles up. Not mocking, just that knowing kind of humor reserved for shared discomfort. You chuckle, too, and you tuck that moment away. There's something utterly grounding about this part of the day. The domestic reset. Preparing not just for sleep, but for safety, for dreams, for stories whispered across the room, and the slow settling of bodies into warmth and rhythm. Historians still argue whether beds in the Viking era were strictly assigned or shared more communally. Some sagas mention separate spaces for honored guests or parents with infants. Others suggest a more flexible arrangement. People simply slept where there was space, warmth, or someone worth cuddling. Your muscles ache gently as you finish. The kind of ache that feels earned. A day of scraping, sewing, hauling straw, laughing at dreams, and avoiding spider drama. You glance once more around the Longhouse. Most beds are prepped. The kids are starting to squabble over who gets the spot closest to the fire tonight. Someone's carving a fishhook in the corner. Another hums a lullaby with no words, just soft, lulling notes that rise and fall like waves. It's almost dinner. Almost night. Almost time to retreat into the soft, prickly embrace of your bedbox. And somehow, the simple act of fixing up straw and furs has left you more satisfied than 100 heroic deeds ever could. The scent of boiling roots thickens in the air, and your stomach gives a low, dramatic grumble, as if to say, finally. Dinner in the Longhouse is neither quick nor quiet. It's a collective, slightly chaotic ritual full of shared bowls, hunched shoulders, and the clatter of wooden spoons against clay. You ease into a spot near the central hearth, wedging yourself between a snoring uncle and a very focused adolescent who seems to be sharpening a spoon. Yes, a spoon. It's probably fine. Tonight's meal is, as predicted, a stew. It's thickened with barley and turnip, seasoned more by smoke than spice. You can spot stray bits of dried fish, maybe even a shred of leftover lamb if you squint. But it's hot, it's filling, and it does exactly what it needs to do. It quiets the belly and slows the brain. You're handed a bowl, hand-carved, slightly scorched on one edge, and a chunk of rough barley flatbread. No forks here, of course, just the spoon and your fingers. And if the stew's thin, you drink it. If it's thick, you shovel. Someone next to you mutters a quick charm under their breath before eating. So the spirits know we're grateful, they explain. You nod solemnly and try to ignore the bit of parsnip dangling from their beard. Eating together is more than just survival. It's community maintenance. Every spoonful shared is another stitch in the blanket that keeps everyone warm and sane through long, cold seasons. Historians widely agree that Viking meals were communal and utilitarian. Food was precious, and mealtime doubled as news time, joke time, and negotiation time. In larger households, stews were the norm. Easy to stretch, easy to reheat, and hard to mess up, provided you didn't burn the bottom, which someone inevitably does. Across the fire, someone's already scraping the crusty bits with their spoon, claiming it's the best part. You're not convinced. Conversations flutter like moths above the flames. There's talk of a cow that might be pregnant, a wager over whether a neighboring village will trade salted herring for wool. Someone insists they saw a shooting star and made a wish. Someone else scoffs and says it was probably a spirit returning home. You listen, sip, chew, smile when appropriate. Your own thoughts begin to drift. Not in a bad way, just in that gentle, post-stew daze that comes with warmth and fullness. The fire crackles like a contented cat, and your toes finally lose that faint tingle of chill. Your bowl is taken by someone younger. Cleanup duty tonight, apparently, and replaced with a small wooden cup of warmed mead. It's weak, probably watered down, but still sweet with fermented honey. The kind of drink that sneaks in on soft feet, loosens your shoulders, and makes you a little more tolerant of your uncle's snores. You lean back against the log wall, and your eyes half close as the soft rhythm of wooden utensils being scrubbed fills the air. A couple of dogs are nosing around, hoping for scraps. One manages to swipe a bit of bread crust from a toddler's fingers. There's a brief yelp, a scolding, and then the child is handed another crust and told not to wave food around like a flag next time. The Longhouse quiets just a notch. A few folks slip out into the evening, maybe to check the livestock or visit the latrine pit. You don't envy them. The warmth here is too precious, too earned. Someone begins a tale. You turn slightly to see who it is. It's the same elder who told the sea eagle story earlier, now leaning forward, eyes sparkling. Their voice is gravelly but smooth, like stones rolled by the tide. They speak of the time when Thor tried to drink the ocean and nearly drained the world dry. Of Loki, ever the mischief maker, who once turned into a salmon just to escape an awkward dinner conversation. The story is one you half know, half forget, and yet it feels fresh again, wrapped in new details and laughter. Historians still argue whether Norse sagas were memorized word for word or performed with improvisation. What's clear is that storytelling was a vital social glue, passed along in fireside sessions just like this one. Part education, part entertainment, part group therapy. As the story weaves on, people settle in. Children lean against parents. Teens pretend not to listen but laugh anyway at the punchlines. Even the dogs seem to pause. You realize your spot by the wall is perfect. Warm, close, cocooned in fur and straw. You adjust slightly, pulling your cloak tighter, and let the elder's voice wash over you like waves. The tale bends into a second one now. This time a ghost story, maybe. Something about a sailor who heard voices in the fog. The room hushes instinctively, everyone leaning closer, pulled by the thread of the tale. Outside, wind brushes the walls. Inside, time stretches, flexes, and slows. You don't speak. You barely move. You're held by the simple ancient spell of dinner's aftermath. The shared food, the shared story, the shared silence that follows when everyone knows the ending is close, but not quite yet. It's not just cozy, it's sacred in a very ordinary way. The story fades like the final ember of a fire. Not with a bang, but with a long exhale. A moment of hush clings to the room, like the smoke curling in lazy trails toward the rafters. Then, a few scattered chuckles. Someone clears their throat, and the Longhouse begins its slow shift toward bedtime. You stretch without standing, your back murmuring in protest. Nothing dramatic, just a reminder that you've spent the day bending, hauling, sewing, fluffing, and squatting in positions that no modern desk chair ever prepares you for. A few others begin rustling too, rearranging furs, shifting closer to sleeping spots. The Longhouse doesn't suddenly fall asleep. It gradually settles like flour through a sieve. Your bed, your wooden box of straw and effort, awaits. But sleep doesn't come all at once. Not here. There's still one last ritual before rest. You wander over to the front entrance, where a narrow slit in the wall allows a peek at the outside. The air is crisp, darker now, touched with the scent of damp earth and distant salt. The sky is clear, thick with stars and a crescent moon so sharp it could slice bread. A few figures linger outside, bundled in cloaks, murmuring quietly under their breath. And there it is, the end of day check. A final glance at the livestock, at the sky, at the firewood stack. You step out into the chill and follow the familiar path behind the Longhouse, lit only by moonlight and the vague silvery outline of frost starting to creep along the grass. You pass the animal pens, quiet now. The goats are curled like loaves of bread, snoring softly. The chickens are stacked in a drowsy pile, feathers fluffed. One eye on the world, one eye dreaming of whatever chickens dream about. You pause to check the fish rack. No thieves, no foxes. A minor miracle. You smile and head back inside. Historians believe that Viking settlements often practiced rotational night watches, especially in larger farms or trading outposts. Tonight, it's your cousin's turn, and she's already pulled a fur blanket over her shoulders and is squinting dramatically at the dark, as if daring it to try something funny. "Don't fall asleep out there," you murmur. "I'm not the one who snored through the thunderstorm last week," she replies. Fair. Back inside, the Longhouse is now quiet in a different way. The chatter has hushed completely. Some people are already lying down, rolled into blankets and furs, facing the wall or each other. Others move about softly, folding garments, finishing last sips of mead, whispering goodnights. There's no brushing of teeth here, no changing into pajamas with tiny ducks on them. You strip off your outer layer, still damp at the hem from earlier, and hang it near the fire. You slip under your fur, still warm from the earlier fluffing, and nestle into the straw which cradles you like an earthy beanbag. A few embers still glow in the hearth. Not enough to warm the house, but just enough to offer a bit of gentle light. Shadows stretch long and lazy across the rafters. You listen, not for anything in particular, but for the familiar hush of a home settling into sleep. There's a soft hum from one of the older women, some old tune, wordless and slow, more vibration than melody. A lullaby meant more for the walls than the people. It drifts like mist across the beds, and before you know it, your breathing has started to match its rhythm. Historians still argue whether Viking Age people truly slept through the night, like modern folks expect. Some evidence suggests segmented sleep, 2 chunks separated by a waking period used for prayer, sex, or checking the goats. But here, tonight, you're hoping for a solid stretch. As you lie there, you become suddenly aware of just how much you can hear. The Longhouse, even asleep, has a soundtrack. The soft inhale-exhale of 15 people and 2 snoring dogs, the creak of timber in the wind, the occasional sleepy mumble or muffled dream laugh. One of the toddlers shifts nearby and kicks off their blanket. A hand, likely maternal, gently covers them again without a word. Another adult sighs in their sleep, a soft groan like a door hinge, and above all, the slow pulse of night wraps around you, thick and warm and utterly real. You close your eyes, and you wait, not impatiently, not with the desperate urgency of a sleepless night in the modern world, just ready, letting the weight of the day slowly pour out of your bones like sand. Eventually, your mind will wander. It always does. You'll find yourself in dreams you'll only half remember. Maybe you'll sail a ship made entirely of spoons. Maybe you'll wrestle a talking goat. Maybe Odin will stop by and tell you your tunic needs more flair. But not yet. For now, you just breathe, one breath, another, and another. You wake slowly, though not all the way. It's not morning yet. Just one of those odd, in-between moments where time stretches like warm dough. A log shifts in the hearth, cracking softly, sending up a final puff of smoke that curls toward the rafters. Somewhere near the entrance, someone shifts on their bench, tugging a fur tighter over their shoulders. You don't open your eyes. There's no need. The Longhouse is wrapped in a heavy hush, like the kind that settles in after a snowfall. You sense, more than hear, the sleeping bulk of the people around you. Their breathing even, their presence steady. But your mind is awake, just a little. Segmented sleep, they call it now. Historians still argue whether this middle-of-the-night wakefulness was routine or just seasonal, tied to the long winter dark. Either way, here you are, tucked in straw, body warm, mind wandering. You adjust slightly beneath your blanket of fur and woven wool, finding a dip in the straw that cradles your hip just right. One of the dogs has wormed its way beside you in the night, its body a small furnace of loyalty and damp fur. You let your hand rest on its side. It sighs, and you both remain still. Over near the hearth, someone else is quietly awake too. An older man, you think. He's muttering a prayer to himself, the words half blended with the sound of the fire. You can't make it out, not quite, but you catch the rhythm. Slow, steady, the same 3-part hum of breath and belief and bone-deep habit. It's not uncommon. Some people rise in this between time to pray, or to think, or to stoke the fire just a little before it fades too far. No lamps, no screens, no clocks, just the strange interior stillness of night's second half. You don't move, but you listen. The Longhouse has a night song all its own. The wind outside nudges at the wooden slats, soft and rhythmic, like someone brushing their palm along the house's flank. A far-off owl hoots, long and hollow. Then silence again. Then the soft shuffle of someone returning from the latrine trench, their feet bare against the floor. Eventually, the man at the fire lies back down. You hear the rustle of straw as he settles into it, a slow exhale of breath that feels like punctuation. And then you're asleep again, just like that. When you finally do wake properly, it's not to an alarm or sudden noise, it's to light. A thread of early dawn peeks in through the gaps in the thatch above the doorway, casting long, thin lines of blue-gray across the floor. The air feels different, just a shade warmer, just a whisper brighter. A soft kind of stirring begins around you. People stretching, sighing, rubbing their eyes, pushing off blankets with gentle grunts and groans. You blink slowly, letting the world reassemble itself. The Longhouse in morning is a different creature than it was at night. Where evening was all golden glow and low voices, morning is hushed hustle, quiet but purposeful. No shouting, no slamming of doors, just people rising. A woman near you yawns so wide it almost counts as a battle cry, then slips her feet into fur-lined boots. She gives a sleepy nod as she passes. You return it, both of you still partly in the dream world. Your joints complain a little as you sit up. Straw clings to your cloak. A chicken has apparently found its way inside sometime during the early hours, and now struts boldly near the hearth, pecking at an old bit of turnip skin. No one seems surprised. You reach for your cloak and slide it over your shoulders, the wool still warm from your sleep. You pull it tight and stretch, arms overhead. A few vertebrae crack in a deeply satisfying way. Another figure, your cousin again, emerges from beneath a heavy pile of furs, her hair wild, eyes half closed. She flops to a sitting position and immediately begins pulling on her boots, muttering about needing to check the goats before they eat each other out of boredom. You catch a glimpse of the sky through the doorway. It's the kind of soft, pearly blue that only happens when the sun is still flirting with the idea of rising. Morning dew sparkles faintly at the threshold, and you can smell fresh earth, cold ash, and whatever the neighbors are cooking already. Someone pokes the fire with a stick, and a few flames flutter back to life. A kettle is set over the coals. Not for coffee, of course, but maybe for a simple herb tea or hot water to wash a baby's face. You ease to your feet, still barefoot, still warm in your core, and make your way toward the fire for a moment before breakfast. The day will start soon, but not quite yet. You crouch by the hearth, warming your hands over the lazy flames, feeling the heat seep into your fingertips like melted snow. Around you, the Longhouse hums with the soft shuffle of people rising. Not in a rush, but with that practiced choreography born from years of repetition. Everyone knows what needs to be done, and nobody does it loudly. Your stomach lets out a quiet grumble. Nothing dramatic, just a polite suggestion that breakfast should be somewhere in your near future. It won't be much by modern standards. There are no fried eggs or pancakes, no foamy lattes or steel-cut oats. But there will be warmth. And something starchy. Maybe barley porridge, maybe flatbread with a smear of lard and a sprinkle of dried herbs. Maybe even a pickled herring if someone's feeling festive. You head over to the cooking area, where one of the older women has already started stirring a pot of grain over the fire. The smell is earthy and faintly sour. Not unpleasant, just hearty. She offers you a nod and a wooden spoon without looking up, and you begin helping without a word, stirring slowly, keeping the mixture from sticking. The warmth of the pot seeps into your forearm. It's hypnotic. While you stir, you glance around. Others are sitting on benches, nibbling on leftover bread from yesterday, or wrapping up in cloaks to step outside. One of the teenagers, still half asleep, stumbles into a wooden post with a quiet thud. No one laughs. They've all been there. Historians suggest Viking breakfasts were usually small, functional, and often eaten while working. A bowl of gruel, a bite of cheese, dried fish if you were lucky. But once in a while, there were treats. Wild berries when in season, or honeyed flatbread saved for feast days. Today is no feast day, but the gruel smells decent. You ladle some into a wooden bowl and head over to your usual seat near the back wall. It's worn smooth from years of people doing exactly what you're doing now. Holding a bowl close to their face, breathing in the steam, and slowly waking up one bite at a time. The first spoonful is warm and bland, which is somehow exactly what you wanted. It sticks to your ribs, and your thoughts settle. Beside you, a friend unwraps a small linen pouch and offers you a bite of smoked fish. Chewy, salty, and surprisingly satisfying. You trade her a chunk of your bread, and she smiles in that way that says, "I would never admit it, but that's the best part of my day." Someone drops a pot outside, and a startled goat bleats indignantly. Inside, nobody reacts. Par for the course. You glance at the beams overhead, where a few cured fish hang beside drying herbs. There's even a bundle of chamomile tied with flax string, its tiny yellow flowers now faded to straw color. It smells faintly of summer. Someone must have hung it last August. You make a mental note to ask if you can pinch a few sprigs for tea later, or maybe just to crush between your fingers and inhale when the wind bites harder than usual. Your breakfast done, you set your bowl aside, giving it a quick wipe with a square of rough cloth. No one here has a dishwasher, not unless you count snowmelt and elbow grease. You take your turn scrubbing a few other bowls with sand and cold water near the back, then leave them to dry near the hearth. While you do, the sun finally breaks through the cracks above the doorway. A golden sliver spills across the floor like honey. It moves slowly, casting long, slanted lines that stretch toward your feet. You can feel the house change with the light. Someone opens the main door a little wider, letting in a proper gust of morning air. It smells of damp wood, livestock, and something faintly sweet. Hay, maybe. Or the bread someone is preparing on the flat stone near the fire. The chickens have gathered near the threshold again, clustered like gossiping old ladies, eyeing the inside as if debating whether they're allowed back in. Spoiler, they're not. You finish drying your hands on your tunic and let yourself lean against the wall, just for a moment. One of the toddlers waddles past you in a tunic far too long for his frame, dragging it like a royal train. He pauses, stares at you for a solid 5 seconds, then burps and toddles off again. History books don't usually mention that part. But it's real. It's in these tiny moments that the Longhouse feels most alive. Not during battles or great feasts, but in the quiet, unremarkable rituals of morning. The shared food, the sleepy banter, the way someone hands you a hot bowl without needing to ask your name. You close your eyes for just a second, feeling the warmth on your face, and realize something surprising. You're looking forward to today. Not because it'll be easy, it probably won't, but because this life, this rhythm, has started to feel familiar. Like a song you've heard before, but are just now learning to hum along with. Outside, the goats are yelling again. It's time. You push open the Longhouse door and step out into the day properly now. Not just peeking from the threshold, but committing to the morning. The cold air greets you with a brisk kiss to the face. Nothing cruel, just enough to make you squint and pull your cloak tighter. The yard outside is a mixture of mud, frost, and determination. A few chickens pick their way around the more solid patches, leaving tiny claw prints in yesterday's puddles. One of them, bold as anything, hops onto a low barrel and stares you down. You nod respectfully. She's clearly in charge. Around the edges of the property, the rest of the settlement is shaking off the last bits of sleep. Smoke threads its way from the other longhouses nearby, coiling into the sky like sleepy dragons. Somewhere, someone is already chopping wood, the thud of axe on log carrying clearly in the morning air. You make your way toward the animal pens first, boots squelching in the cold mud, the smell of manure mingling with wood smoke and damp straw. It's not unpleasant, surprisingly. Just honest. The goats greet you like over-caffeinated toddlers. They jostle at the fence, bleating impatiently, clearly unimpressed with the pace of your morning. You lean over, give the bossiest one a scratch behind the ear, and unlatch the gate. Feeding time. Inside the pen, you scatter hay from the rickety cart nearby, brushing bits of straw from your sleeves as you work. The animals push and elbow for the best clumps. You know their routines by now. The brown one always nudges from the left. The white one guards her pile like a dragon hoarding treasure. Historians have pieced together much of Viking farm life through archaeological digs, manure piles, feeding troughs, and barn layouts included. But they still argue whether most families kept animals inside the Longhouse during colder months or housed them in lean-tos and sheds nearby. Judging by the mess, you're glad your goats get their own space. With the goats fed, you head toward the small stable. The one horse, an older, shaggy beast named something vaguely mythological, is munching on leftover oats from last night. You offer a handful more, rubbing his nose gently. His breath puffs into the air like steam from a kettle. He's a good horse, retired from battle, if the village tales are to be believed. You're not convinced. He once got startled by a cabbage rolling off a cart. Back outside, you pause and stretch, joints clicking, breath visible in little clouds. The sun is still low, but climbing. Your shadow stretches long behind you, a reminder that the day is yours now. Chores and all. You make your way back toward the Longhouse, passing a small group of children attempting to herd the last of the chickens into the coop. It's more of a mutual negotiation than a chase. One girl holds out a handful of grain like a bribe, muttering softly. The chicken does not comply. You step inside again, greeted by warmth and the low hum of conversation. People have started gathering their tools, wooden buckets for hauling water, baskets for firewood, small knives for scraping hides or shaping pegs. A cousin waves you over, hands you a rough cloth sack, and gestures towards the woods. Time to forage a bit. Late roots, maybe wild greens if you're lucky, or resin for waterproofing the boat. Before you leave, you swing by the hearth and grab a chunk of bread wrapped in a scrap of linen. Second breakfast, if you want to be generous. A little stale, a little dry, but you chew it slowly as you walk, letting it settle in your belly like a polite brick. Outside again, the wind has picked up, but only slightly, just enough to sway the tops of the trees. You and your cousin take the footpath toward the edge of the woods, boots crunching over frost-hardened grass. A crow follows overhead, its call rough but oddly comforting. You breathe in deep. The forest edge always smells clean. Pine and damp leaves, earth and bark. The ground is littered with last year's needles and new shoots poking through, testing the air. Your cousin spots something and gestures. A patch of wild garlic, just starting to wake up. You crouch, dig a little, collecting the roots carefully and tucking them into your sack. Further in, you find resin drips on a tree trunk, amber-colored and sticky. You scrape them with a flat tool into a little wooden bowl. It'll be used later for patching a small boat or making torches. The work is slow, steady, and rhythmic. You don't talk much. The forest doesn't need conversation. Just footsteps and breath, the occasional sniffle, and the soft thunk of your gathering knife against bark. At one point you stop and just listen. Birds, wind, that distant creak of trees moving. Somewhere far off, the gentle splash of a stream. For a moment, time doesn't move at all. It just expands. Eventually, you loop back toward the village, your sack heavier, your fingers stained with sap and dirt. Your cousin hums a tune under their breath. Something old, something half-remembered. Back at the Longhouse, people are returning too. Someone carries firewood in their arms like a bundle of sleeping babies. Another rolls a barrel from the storage shed with her knee. The chickens are winning the standoff. Inside, lunch is being prepared. Not a grand affair, but filling. Soup of some sort, with bits of fish and cabbage. The smell is sharp and savory. You hand off your bundle of greens to the cook, and she nods, already plucking and chopping with efficiency born of 1,000 mornings like this. You sit again in your usual spot. It's been a good start to the day. You lean back on the bench, stretching your legs out under the table, while steam from the soup curls in lazy spirals toward your face. Around you, spoons clink gently against wooden bowls, and the warm, slightly fishy smell of midday stew settles into your tunic, your hair, your very soul. This is the part of the morning where everyone's still working, but slower now, like the entire Longhouse exhales at once. Lunch isn't a formal event. It's more of a refueling stop. You sip the soup, thin but not flavorless thanks to the wild garlic you gathered earlier. A bit of chopped turnip drifts by in the broth. You fish it out and chew, slow and thoughtful. Beside you, an older man is sharpening a knife on a whetstone as he eats. One of the toddlers toddles by again, this time with both boots on the correct feet. A win for the day. He trips over a broom, catches himself with surprising grace, and toddles on. You suppress a smile. This is the quiet between tasks. Not quite rest, but not quite labor either. Someone by the door begins repairing a fishing net. The wooden shuttle clicks as it weaves back and forth. The rhythm is soothing, almost musical. You find yourself watching the loops and knots, mesmerized by how something so fragile becomes strong when interwoven. Historians debate the full extent of Viking domestic craftsmanship. How much was done in winter versus summer, and how much time was spent on communal tasks like net mending. But what's clear is that these daily repairs were a kind of domestic lifeline, done by both men and women as part of a shared survival. Outside, you hear the creak of the loom in the separate weaving hut. Someone's spinning wool into thread, probably dyed with onion skin or lichens scraped from rocks. A faint rhythm echoes through the walls. Tap, pull, beat. The hum of labor continues. After lunch, you rise and take your empty bowl to the back. Water is being warmed over the fire now. Not boiling, just hot enough for washing. You dip your hands in, wipe them dry, and grab a broom made from bundled birch twigs. Time to tidy. The Longhouse floor is never clean by modern standards. Dirt, straw, bits of ash, and animal hair, these things accumulate quickly. But sweeping is more than hygiene here. It's ritual. You sweep not just the dirt, but the sleep, the stillness, the sluggishness of morning. Out with the goats, out with the ash, out with the dreams. The broom crackles across the floor as you work, kicking up dust that dances in the sunbeams slanting in from above. You pause for a moment, just watching the light. It's beautiful. A dog snoozes near the hearth, one paw twitching in sleep. You detour around him. Back at the far end of the Longhouse, someone is carving combs out of bone. Delicate, beautiful little tools that will probably end up being traded. One has the faint outline of a bird etched into it, just for flair. You glance over their shoulder, and they raise an eyebrow as if to say, "Not for you," or you smirk and move on. Later, you step outside again. The air has shifted, warmer now, touched by sun and wind and the scent of earth waking up. Spring is not quite here, but she's sending postcards. You make your way down toward the water. The small stream at the edge of the village is bubbling over smooth stones, ice melted, fish darting in the deeper pools. You crouch and splash your face, gasping at the chill, and then smile at how alive it makes you feel. The afternoon is fading already. In the Viking world, daylight is precious, and people move accordingly. You help carry wood into the Longhouse for the evening fire. Someone's building a rack to smoke more fish. A group is reshaping a broken tool handle with practiced hands. Everyone works, but no one hurries. There's a serenity in the slow pace. As the sun begins to dip, you sit back on a low stool and watch the shadow climb the side of the wall. The same shadow, you imagine, that climbed this way every afternoon for generations. A quiet sundial, made of wood and habit. Someone begins to hum a tune. It's not loud or showy, just a low, rhythmic melody passed from grandmother to granddaughter. You hum along without even realizing it. Dinner will be soon, but for now, there's just this. The Longhouse glowing golden in the light of a fading sun, the people inside it moving like clockwork wound by hand, and the sense, soft but certain, that this day, like so many before it, has been exactly enough. The light fades slowly now, slipping through the slats above like honey poured from a jar. Shadows stretch and settle, quieting the corners of the Longhouse one by one. You shift in your seat, your limbs growing heavier, the warmth of the fire curling around your ankles. The room softens into low voices and clinking spoons, the occasional yawn echoing off timbered walls. Even the animals outside seem to hush with the coming dusk. Above you, the rafters stretch like ribs overhead, solid, familiar. You watch a wisp of smoke rise lazily upward, curling into the gloom, and for a moment, it feels like the entire house is exhaling. The day has been lived, the chores done. The world, for now, has paused. You wrap your cloak tighter, settling deeper into your bench, eyelids heavy. The scent of herbs, sage and smoke and something sweet, lingers in the air, carried gently by the low draft winding through the beams. Around you, the hum of sleep begins to settle in. A log shifts in the hearth. A child murmurs in their dreams. Someone adds another handful of moss to a crack in the wall, just in case the wind stirs again before morning. And you breathe, long, slow, still, out here in this wooden cradle of fire and earth and sleep. You are part of something ancient, quiet, and deeply human. You let your mind drift with the smoke, your thoughts slow to a crawl, and the weight of the day dissolves like snow on warm stone. Sleep now. The goats can wait until morning. Good night.